Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and joining me tonight is a guy who knows another guy, and that guy is me, and... Wait, that's not an introduction at all. I just looped it right back to myself. Anyway, let's just say hi to Dan. Hey, Dan.
Actually, I don't know you. Who is this? Who am I calling? I'd like to get a large thin crust pepperoni and sausage, please. Hello?
Well, if this was a different season, we'd be throwing it on a garage roof. After that. If only we had been covering that episode. But speaking of what we'll be covering, as you guys already know, we have reached the second half of Breaking Bad Season 2. And let me say, personally, I believe specifically it's this chunk of episodes that makes me happy that we decided to split up the seasons and how we're covering them the way we're doing. And it's because I believe it's this specific selection of episodes is what took Breaking Bad to the next level. Some might say, maybe it's what cemented the status as a top tier series because, maybe even surpassed Ozark, Brian. No, I'm just kidding. That's not a slight meant to season 1, which I loved, or the first 7 episodes of season 2, some of which are amazing. Great episodes to be found in both of those swaths of episodes or whatever you want to. But I think once we hit the second half of this season, that's kind of when the story, I feel, really kicks into a different gear, and where Breaking Bad really, it expands its universe in terms of just not just what the show is about, but the potential of what the show could be for just so much more intense drama, pretty much like no one had seen before on television. I think as we go through, especially when we get past this season, we get into seasons 3 and 4, when we start talking about those, there's going to be very few shows, if any, that maintained that kind of insane intensity level. I mean, The Shield might have done that a few times. That might be one of the only ones I can think of. The Sopranos didn't do it. Other shows that we've talked about, not really. They do it on the occasional episode, but not for a sustained stretch of episodes. That's what this show does. Or did, I should say. Right.
And it still does. Even if we've seen it already, it still does have the same effect on it. So it's just good stuff.
It reminds me of when you're watching... Well, everyone out there they probably have certain movies that they've rewatched a number of times over the years. I know I have. I know you have. Everyone has. And it's funny about we can say this about TV shows too. I'm just switching to cinematic I don't know why, but I am. But it's funny where it doesn't matter how many times you've seen something, and you might know it by heart, left and right, whatever. There's still that little weird part of your brain that still seems to act like it hasn't seen it before, where you're still hoping something doesn't happen, even though you know very well it does. You're hoping that character isn't going to die, or that person is going to realize, and you've watched it 17 times already. You know damn well what's going to happen. But
you do that thought, just like, if this character just did this, at this point, this wouldn't happen. But even if I've seen it 25 times, it's the same thing.
And to me, when that happens and you feel it, that's what I always refer to as when something affects you viscerally, when you have that kind of feeling, which means it's something good. I'm not talking about some piece of crap thing, because, you might think that, but then you might think about how bad the script is or something as well. Here is where you just have that thought and you're going, and Breaking Bad, bring it back to Breaking Bad. Good Lord, that is a show. Again, other shows have done this as well. I'm not going to say it's the only one, of course not. But I don't think any other show, as many times as you're watching it, as many instances where you're going to be going, like what you just said. It's kind of like, if you had only done this. Or if you could have just decided to do that. Or if you couldn't, if you didn't let your pride get in the way. Or if you'd only it's like, what's the joke for this? I'm going to show my age for people who remember Woody Woodpecker cartoons. There's a classic Woody Woodpecker cartoon where a guy keeps walking through the entire cartoon saying, if Woody had gone right to the police, this would never have happened. And when you watch certain episodes of Breaking Bad, it might not be a police thing, but if Walter had just gotten over his pride, this would never have happened, or something like that, because it happens over and over. And back to like these specific collection of episodes, again, you've got episodes like, the ones we're about to talk about, like Better Call Saul, or the probably almost as iconic 4 Days Out, and major benchmark episodes when everything from knowing this is not going to be about Walt's cancer anymore, or what this man is willing to do, or who he's willing to sacrifice for his own security. And it's just, and then when you get to the point of, after dealing with all the primal forces that have already left him to suffer the consequences he should have seen coming. And that's the thing with Walter White throughout at least these early seasons, and it does happen again in the later seasons. It's the consequences like, dude, you should have seen that coming. Whether it be encroaching on someone's territory or making a decision to do this, that, or the other thing. Almost the darkest joke of all about season 2, the consequence he never could have seen coming is what ends the season with the air traffic controller collision situation. No one could have seen that coming unless they were watching the little cold opens of like several episodes this season.
Right.
Okay. Just give me a second. Let me just wipe away a little bit here. And yeah, I was going to say also, and as you know, in the previous podcast, I keep referencing that old top 25 list I did, because I don't know why I keep pimping something I wrote 8.5 years ago. I did go back to look at it, and I realized 3 episodes just from this half of season 2 landed in my top 12. So I realized, I must have been a bigger fan of season 2 than I thought it'd be. I just think it's funny because when people have conversations about, as they do about a lot of the great shows, and if anyone who listened to a series, our last several greatest TV drama episodes of all time countdowns, we did it about The Wire, we did it about Breaking Bad, we did it about Mad Men, Lost, whatever. You talk about your favorite seasons. I think with Breaking Bad, it comes down to between 3, 4, and 5, what people's favorite season is. A lot of people pick 4, some people pick 3. There are some people who like the final season the best. Most people don't pick season 2. And I'm not saying they should, it wasn't my choice, but I just am showing it's a damn significant season,
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's lots of good stuff there.
And this'll be the last thing I'll say, and then we'll get on to the episodes. The one thing I'll say about watching this half, and I knew it going into it because I knew I was going to kick off the half, I very much have enjoyed rewatching season 1 yet again. I don't know how many times I've watched that at this point, and rewatching the first half of this season. But I was genuinely had moments of sheer happiness watching these final 6 episodes. There are so many things that just made me fucking smile. Like, and when there was a little, and even when there was a little something that I actually didn't remember, I was actually happy about something I didn't remember because I thought I knew it something by heart. And I was like, I didn't know he called him. I thought he called Saul or something like that. I love that. Shit like that. Just great.
Right.
Okay. I'll stop the preamble. It's gone on enough. Let's move on to what would be the 8th episode of season 2, which is something we've talked about here before, so to speak, which of course it is Better Call Saul. And let me start off by just saying, at least as far as the first 2 seasons of Breaking Bad, this is easily the episode I've rewatched the most times. The fact that you and I actually did that special Lost podcast that was kind of based on this episode. So we're sort of kind of breaking a rule here, but we're not. I mean, other than maybe Ozymandias and the finale, I mean, it's probably in that top 3 of the episodes I've watched the most times of Breaking Bad for me. I don't know about you. They may be all even for you. Maybe you have other preferences. But I think especially because we covered the show Better Call Saul. I mean, we rewatched it for that podcast. I've gone back and rewatched it a few other times because of that podcast and because of the show. When they first mentioned the Lalo character, I went back to that episode to watch that again. I was trying to remember, wait, is Ignacio Nacho? Is that what he means? Is that, have they defined that on the show? That kind of stuff,
Yeah.
So, okay. I'm just going through what I have here. Yeah, and as I mentioned, we actually, and if anyone else wants to track it down, it is kind of funny. I didn't write down what episode number it was, but the podcast that Dan and I did was actually titled Already Called Saul. It was us goofing with the idea that we unearthed a lost podcast in a time capsule, from like 2009. It's kind of funny. I enjoy. I think we did a nice little job with that one. We were in character,
Yeah.
So, I think we did that.
Yeah. Did we? And it's funny too. Yeah, mocking our relationship and financial problems. It's amazing how totally changed.
When we were right. But I do appreciate that we actually went through some trouble of trying to make it very time specific. So it's 2009. So everything from Alex Rodriguez to Dexter is made reference to in that podcast, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, the episode. This is another episode directed by Terry McDonough, and as one might have guessed, because it's Better Call Saul, this episode was actually written by Peter Gould. You guys know who Peter Gould is if you've listened to Better Call Saul podcast. So let's move on. With this one, I think we have one of my personal favorite, let's just get right to it openings of almost any episode. We got Badger sitting on that park bench in front of that really incredibly colorful playground that they found. And I always like that kind of works as a metaphoric peek at what this episode and what the world of Saul Goodman is going to be, Not to mention you have his face and catchphrase plastered across the bench that they're sitting on as well. We also meet DJ Qualls as Getz, or Detective Getz. And look, I know this gawky string being of an actor gets loads of work, and we can name any number of things that we've seen him in. But
I watched him in The Man in the High Castle until he got inexplicably written out for the final season with no explanation.
Well, let's not get started on. And it's funny, and yet still, that final season is still better than the previous season, which was, I think it was the second, or is the one season of that show is like so boring. It's just like, maybe it was the second season. Can't remember. I liked the last season, but I didn't like the ending, but we can talk about that another time. But I agree, it's like, ripping off Close Encounters, quite frankly. But back to Qualls. I always kind of wished he had shown up on Breaking Bad a couple more times. I think it would have been fun for him. I was always wondering why they couldn't work him in again. I mean, he's very busy, so it might simply be he was probably always working on, something else. But dude, I'm like, you spent all that time on that Z Nation zombie show, which is a lovely guilty pleasure of a show to watch, but you couldn't have made time to show up one or two times on Breaking Bad. That would have been cool. Anyway. Yeah. But they probably didn't need him, so. But the conversation between him and Badger is just so good. And I think my favorite thing about this whole situation is how it ends, that it almost makes Badger look even more stupid by the fact that he turns out to be absolutely right about the two undercover vans. Because when they both appear, it is exactly what he said. The flower van and the other one, which are so obviously, undercover guys in vans. Why were you going through this if you knew that those vans were that? I just really got a big kick out of that.
I like how they shoot this with a long lens too. It's just looks cool, and it makes sense because like somebody's probably watching with a long lens anyway. But whenever they do that on something, I tend to appreciate it.
Exactly, and what I love about when they do something like that, be it on this show or anywhere else, I love when they don't call attention to it,
right?
Because if they'd done something where there was like also maybe like a little digital readout or whatever, then we're very much, or we actually saw the perspective, people from the van thing, then it'd been like, oh, okay. But doing it that way, there's a certain subtlety to it. And it's like, oh, because it's just, this is the way they're choosing to film it, but it very much feels like we're watching it from a surveillance van or something like that, or camera kind of thing. You're absolutely right. That's a great call on your part. After the opening titles, then we get, it makes me so happy. We get a TV spot for Saul Goodman, attorney at law. Now, when this episode first aired back, I guess it was April of 2009, I guarantee you there had to be hundreds, maybe thousands of viewers who instantly thought of Odenkirk's work on like Mr. Show, or maybe even that old Ben Stiller show that he used to be on, because you've got the deliberately cheesy and over-the-top elements. They have all the production value of like a local cable access show, combined with that, that Saul Goodman look, not just the suit, it's that hair. you know, at this point in time, it's such a departure from anything that we had seen on Breaking Bad. It's kind of a jolt to the senses. Like, wait, what is this? Now, we do see, as we pull back, we see that the spot is playing on Jesse's new big screen TV. So it means he's finally got it working. And then we can follow that little trail of clothes, and we see just how much Jesse and Jack's hand-holding, has progressed from the end of the previous episode. So it didn't take much. There's an important plot and character point we get here as well. We do learn that Jane is in recovery, that she has been drug-free for at least 18 months. Yeah, it's going to be significant. So, I don't know if there's really much to talk about beyond that. It's okay. A lot of this is just setting the stage for what we know is going to be happening in the later episodes. So, we're certainly going to have more to talk about when we get to those scenes. Switching back to the White House, as I like to call it, after Skylar leaves for weekend duty at the office. By the way, as she says, this is a regular thing. Don't you think Walt would have already been taking advantage and planning for such days to be cooking days? But, whatever. I think that's when Marie calls the house, which leads to Walt dropping by to check on Hank, who had got sent home after the, let's call it the tragic incident in Juarez. I really, one of the things I really enjoy about this season, and whether it be especially in this half of the season, but I think there might have been a scene earlier as well. There's a few Hank and Walt conversations, which, especially when you've watched the entire series and now you go back and watch them again, don't all the Hank and Walt scenes just feel a bit more important when you watch them again after everything that happened?
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting just seeing them and how they lay out and stuff, and how you see the two characters for like who they really are. It's pretty obvious almost the entire time that Walt's just like a complete douchebag, and Hank's like kind of a loudmouth, but like actually like pretty cool. So it's all there if you're able to see it for what it is, I guess.
It's interesting. Even after all the times I've rewatched this show, I still find myself defending Walter White for most of what he does on the show. A couple times, no, but most of the time, yes.
After a narcissist for a year, I see through that bullshit like in 5 seconds now, and like it's just so much there all the fucking time. So,
okay.
Very below the surface, it's just there. You pick up stuff from like that. That's how life works. So you see stuff like that. And,
right. I hear you.
Yeah.
But one of the things I really enjoy about the scenes is just watching Walt. And it depends on the scene. There are some times where you feel he's trying, even if it's just to please himself, because obviously no one can actually know what the hell he's really talking about. But he's trying to exert the fact that, I am better, smarter, etc. than you are, or I am ahead of the game where you are. And sometimes I think he's doing it for actual curiosity, or to actually kind of feel out what his likely or probable opponent is thinking, or just the authorities in general, and that's specifically Hank. So I kind of find some of that stuff interesting. Here, the fact that Walt is there and it's more of, he's being more empathetic, because Walt's a character that goes back and forth. Sometimes he can be very empathetic, sometimes not so much, depending what stage he's in, I guess.
Yes, and he's pretty solid. And usually it's like in moments where like he's forced into situations where he ends up being, has to be like there for somebody when he really doesn't want to, but he manages to be pretty good at it when he's in that situation.
Right.
Even though his natural inclination is to avoid them, he tends to be pretty solid with that kind of stuff. He's not always a complete douchebag, like I said.
I like a character that I don't necessarily know what they're going to do in a given situation. That I can't predict that they're going to be the best person or the worst person. So whether a character has always been written that way, or if a character changes and becomes that way. Like I had posted a comment about a totally different TV show recently, just the other day. I'm going to take a sidestep here. It was a very weird weekend where I was either watching one of two different TV shows all weekend. I was either trying to get through this half of the season of Breaking Bad, because it takes me longer because I have to write all my notes and blah, blah, blah. So it basically takes me twice as long to go through every episode, essentially. I'm doing that, or I'm watching the show Ted Lasso. You don't get much more different on the spectrum than Breaking Bad and Ted Lasso. But I actually had commented on a Facebook thread where someone was knocking a character, and I think they referred to them as human garbage, which I thought was a bit rough because, and now I hadn't gotten up to the episode they had gotten up to. I was like 2 behind, but then I caught up to them, and I saw why they said that. It still seemed to be, that's a bit harsh and judgmental. I mean, the character does and say something which is pretty lousy or awful. I'm not going to call someone human garbage over one thing someone does or says in their life when they've shown that previously they weren't like that. And maybe there are reasons why they're like that. And my point of why I'm bringing this up, because there's always a point, is I defended it by saying, I like the fact that a character not just changes, but also might not be the best person all the time. That's a more interesting character to me. The fact that that in this moment, this character is that's a scumbag move. Yeah. Okay. It doesn't mean he's evil. Don Draper does a lot of really shitty bad things. Is Don Draper an evil character? No. He's not a great guy. You know what he is? He's human. He does good things. He does bad things. He helps Peggy here. He leaves Sal out to dry there. You know what I mean? So now Walt, we know, is going to become a worse person as the show goes along, or his worst tendencies are all going to come out as the show goes along. But I still find him more interesting. And this kind of goes for almost all the characters on the show, by the way. It's not just a Walter White thing. It is like, no one's perfect, and everyone has their moments where, ooh, that's not the best thing. He just happens to be the worst of them, I would say.
Right.
Is it Hank who has, I think it's Hank who has the phrase when he talks about what he initially doesn't think he and Walt have much in common. And I think he uses the phrase experiential overlap. And I went, wow, I don't even think Walt would come up with a phrase like that. We don't have much experiential overlap. And that's when Walt says, what if I told you we do? And I was like, ooh, that's kind of interesting. But it's kind of cool because their discussion becomes one about fear being the real enemy. And Walt is actually giving him a fairly sincere pep talk. Because remember, Walt didn't have to show up. He didn't have to, this wasn't like he wasn't flung in. He didn't have to come there to do any of this. So I thought that was it's a very interesting moment for them, I thought, personally. Yeah. Okay. So then we switch to, let's just go through the episode. Walt and Jesse are divvying up the money, and that's when they find out that Badger has gotten busted. Not much to say there. We'll switch back to Hank. Why is it that Hank keeps having the panic attacks when he's on the elevator? Is it because he's just alone in that small space and that's kind of where it starts to manifest? Or he knows, like, it's kind of because he doesn't have it in his office, or he doesn't have it in the parking lot, But we've seen it happen a few times on the elevator. I wonder why that would be a trigger or something.
It's probably just because, he knows, he's going to have to be, Mr. Loudmouth Macho Dude, right after that. So it's kind of like his last chance to, be by himself and right before that. I'm sure, he's not really feeling like Mr. Big Macho Cool Cop anymore. So I'm sure it's just kind of that. Right.
Maybe it's sort of like when say when a stand-up comedian is about to be on back in the day when they're going to be on the Tonight Show for the first time, and where they're going to have their panic attack or start to freak out is right when they're behind that curtain before the curtain opens and they come out. So the elevator is kind of like the curtain opening, and when he's going to meet either be his colleagues or friends or whatever. So that makes sense. Okay, now let's get to the fun stuff. Saul walks in to the little interrogation room right when Getz is trying to persuade Badger to give up who his supplier is. I love that Saul calls him a sneaky Pete. I always thought, I wonder if that stayed lodged in Bryan Cranston's brain. So he became one of the main producers and people behind the show Sneaky Pete on Amazon Prime several years later. I also kind of dug that we find out that Badger, or should we say Brandon's, last name is Mayhew. Did they decide to name him that because Matt Jones is as big as a Wookiee, so they decided to name him after the actor who played Chewbacca. That's what I thought, at least. All right, wasn't that funny? So anyway, Saul's there, and he pretty much asked for a 4,650. I love that the number is so oddly specific. It's not 4,000. It's not 5,000. It's not 4,500. It's 46. It's 4,650. Whatever. And the money order is to be made out to Ice Station Zebra Associates. We've talked about that on the podcast before, because we also know, Better Call Saul viewers know, that was a name that Kim came up with for that fake software company when she and Jimmy were trying to pull off that little scam back in, God, I think it's the second season of Better Call Saul. This just in that one episode. Now we get this little moment. What we thought at the time was the first encounter with Hank. The nice thing about rewatching the scene, about the interaction between Saul Goodman and Hank, it's kind of played in a way, and I'm sure it was unintentional because it filmed this back in 2009. It's very convenient for the show. The meeting in the corridor is done with such a vague enough air. It's clearly possible that these two might have encountered each other before, which Better Call Saul then pretty much confirms, because it's pretty much him meeting Hank, right?
Yes.
And while that's going on outside, then we skip to Walt and Jesse basically outside Saul's office, and we get that's where you get the iconic, you don't want a criminal lawyer, you want a criminal lawyer kind of thing. Like what? Oh, they flip coin. They flip a coin to decide who's actually going to go in. And of course, it has to be Walt, because it's going to be funnier if it's Walt. I mean, you got to go with the funnier possibility. Walt and then it's one of those things I just love looking for the little details. I love, of all the things in that horrific office waiting room where Walt is looking so inconspicuous with his outfit on and the sunglasses and the hat. I love the camera just lingering on that kid, just picking his nose like no tomorrow. And then we get the first meeting, history time, the first meeting of Saul Goodman and Mr. Mayhew. Haha. And I love that right off the bat, we find out that his real name is McGill. Yay. So it's very cool to know that they established his other name right from the start, way back when. And of course we get to have that little comment about, why he wants to appear Jewish, Saul thinks it's a good news when he tells, Mr. Mayhew that the DEA is involved, which means they're really going after some heavy hitter named Heisenberg. And what's interesting about the way the scene turns out is that the fact that Saul apparently refuses to be paid off, at least at the moment when you're watching it, obviously it's not in the best interest of his own client. And as we piece together from the bit of conversation between Walt and Jesse, about him being like morally outraged, I kind of think at this point, maybe Saul isn't exactly the dirty lawyer that they had already envisioned. But as we see later on that night after Saul, again, this is a little creepy now after watching Better Call Saul, that Saul admires the booty on Francesca. How, that's one of those things where I bet they, in retrospect, I kind of wish we could retcon that away. Kind of like Luke and Leia making out in Empire Strikes Back or something. It's like, ooh, now when you see it makes you feel a little creepy. But we get a more real close and official view of what Saul Goodman's car is. And I love bringing up the cars for this show because and the Saul Goodman car, it's a 1997 Cadillac Seville. It's white, and it's got yet another person. They go crazy on this show with the personalized license plates. They just have so much fun with this on the show. Of course, he's might have the most famous one of all. It's the Lawyer Up license plate. But we get to what's probably one of the most famous scenes in Breaking Bad that isn't stone cold serious as well, because it's kind of like in the Jesse and the Green Beans League, but it's much better than that scene. Because this is when Walt and Jesse, once again, they put on their goofy ski masks and they snatch Saul. Now, and we were talking about it earlier because that scene has taken on additional significance because of his name dropping, which now they've connected to what we've watched happen in the last season or two of Better Call Saul, especially the name of Lalo, which is probably one of the things I think you and I, or maybe just me, I don't know, I shouldn't speak for you. We're kind of still thinking, okay, I guess they can't kill Lalo because the way he's talking here, it sounds like Lalo is still alive. But I mean, they could get around that, I suppose. But like he could be killed, and he just might not even know about it. I guess.
Yeah, well, if Gus kills Lalo, there's no reason that Saul would necessarily know about it because he's just not that closely involved with that organization all the time. So.
Right. Yeah. So. But through this scene, he's screaming, it wasn't him, it was Ignacio was the one. And then after he's yelled at to speak English, that's when he realizes that these guys weren't sent by Lalo. So, yeah, but we know these Saul nappers, they're not Lalo's men. And Jesse takes the lead by making it clear that they were sent by the people that Badger works for. I mean, you gotta love when Saul says, kind of as an aside, that the bribe was kind of low. I just love that even at this moment, these men with guns who have him in the desert, he'll still make a comment like, oh yeah, the bribe was kind of low. But if that first plan didn't work, maybe this new one wasn't too well thought out either. And right now, we can actually listen to the rest of that from this point on.
You're going to give Badger Mayhew the best legal representation ever. But no deals with the DEA. All right, Badger will not identify anyone to anybody. If he does, you're dead.
Why don't you just kill Badger? I mean, follow me, guys, but mosquitoes buzzing around you, bite you on the ass. You don't go gunning for the mosquito's attorney. You go grab a fly swatter, so to speak. I mean, all due respect, do I have to spell this out for you?
We're not killing Badger, yo!
Then you got real problems, okay? Because the DEA is going to come down on your boy like a proverbial ton of bricks. I mean, I don't think I'm going out on a limb here, but hey, he's not going to like prison. He's going to sing like Celine Dion, regardless of what you do to me. Mr. Mayhew? Recognize your cough. Take that mask off, get some air. Go on. Take it easy. Breathe in, breathe out. All right, I'm gonna stand up, all right? Because I got bad knees. That's better. Okay, now listen, the three of us are gonna work this out, yeah? How? First things first, you're gonna put $1 in my pocket, both of you. You want attorney-client privilege, don't you? So that everything you say is strictly between us. I mean it. Put $1 in my pocket. Come on, make it official. Come on, do it. That's it, come on. Just $1. What? All right, now you, ski bum. Come on, give with the $1.
Go on.
Be smart.
What? Well, I got you 5.
I'll take a 5. Come on already, come on. Be cool. Okay, you're now both officially represented by Saul Goodman and Associates. Your secrets are safe with me under threat of disbarment. All right? Take the ski mask off. I feel like I'm talking to the Weather Underground here.
Just do it.
Okay, so if a prison shanking is completely off the table, and we're sure of that?
No shanking!
All right. And the way I see it is, somebody's going to prison. It's just a matter of who.
That's still one of my favorite scenes of pretty much of all time.
Oh yeah, it's good. It's funny. It's cool the way they shoot it. They look goofy. It's a lot of fun.
And And it's funny. I think I remember reading somewhere. I didn't read it this over these last few days when I was doing the notes for it, but I guess I read it some other point in time where I think he makes a reference to his knees, like he's got bad knees or something. And there's a certain point in the Better Call Saul series where Jimmy makes a reference to having knee issues or something. So, or something happens that kind of connects to that. And someone said, oh, they did that. It was a very nice little aside to that, kind of nod to that. And I was like going, I can hardly wait. I'm going to be doing a Better Call Saul rewatch, I think, soon, because I don't even remember that. So we go from there to Badger talking to Hank and the authorities, and then we skip over to Walt and Jesse in Saul's ridiculous office. And that's where we find out about the plan that Saul has cooked up for them, where they're going to have a guy who gets paid to take the fall and go to prison. Now, my favorite thing about this specific scene, and I think, does it happen in more than just a scene? I don't remember. I know it happens a couple times. Every time that Walt gives Jesse a look when Saul mentions the option of having Badger killed off, either it be when they were, because it happened. Oh yeah, it happened when they were in the desert scene that we just heard, or here where when Saul says we can always Badger in the chow line, and I just love Walt just looks at him like that might make this a whole lot easier.
Well, yeah, he always has it. Like, he wants to say, like, yeah, do it, look on his face, but he just can't. But that was for that idea.
It's funny, and again, it's almost the what's the myth of Sisyphus, whatever, that we've talked about, like when we talk about Fargo and other things. It feels like that's the deal with their situation, because once again, an unexpected major expense is basically going to drain their resources down to almost zero, which is probably what leads to the next episode. Then for the rest of the episode, we have Walt and Jesse keeping an eye on the cops while and Badger, and how it all almost goes ridiculously wrong. Now, I know the comedic heart of this scene is Walt blocking Hank and the cop's view with his goofy prattle. And this is where Cranston's sitcom past really comes in handy with a scene like that. But the thing that makes me laugh most about the scene, I kind of love how the guy who's taking the rap for them, Jimmy, what's his name? The fact he just instantly drops to his knees with his hands on top of his head way faster than any normal person should. It's like really brief, but I kept thinking that is some excellent comic direction there. That every time I see it, it makes me laugh, and it's really nicely done.
It's just one of those like things that just like sets a show above so many other shows. Just that little attention to detail. Like of course he's used to take a fall. It's just like a fighter like rolling with a punch or whatever like that. It's just of course he would do that. It just makes
right.
You never see stuff like that on other shows. I mean, very very rarely you see something at that level of just like clearly obvious, thoughtful, but just funny also.
Yeah, and then actually that's a nice analogy, because it would be like a fighter who's being paid to take a fall, and he does it in such a bad way where it's obvious to everyone, where he's barely touched and he just falls down or something. It's a very sitcom-y kind of thing, but it's still pretty funny. I think they did it in an episode of Taxi once, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so what else is left in the episode? Well, you have Jesse, Jane, and the new mattress, so you know what that means. So they don't have to hurt their backs while they're, doing the deed. And so we can skip from that to Walt. Walt is grading papers. Oh, by the way, have we noticed that Walt might be getting meaner as a teacher as he continues to, quote unquote, break bad? Because, I know that he wrote ridiculous on Jesse's chem paper years ago, but you know what? If you go online, I love that you can do this. You can actually get a big zoomed in version of Jesse's chemistry paper. And when you see what Jesse actually wrote on his test paper, Mr. White writing ridiculous is being nice. I mean, he also wrote apply yourself. Jesse is literally answering things like, why do I need to know this? Or I don't care.
Yeah, you can see it on the Blu-ray.
Oh, that's right. You're right. That's great. I forgot about that. But here, this season, when you had that moment with Walt with that Barry kid in the previous episode, the whole don't bullshit a bullshitter thing. And now the comments he's writing on this paper, not even close. I mean, oh man. I'm thinking, because, I went to a math and science high school, and chemistry and physics were not my best subjects. I'm just imagining if I had a teacher write like that on some of and I got scores that were not much different than this, especially if physics killed me. I got like a 38 once on a test. I'm imagining what the teacher should have written, whatever.
Yeah.
But
I sucked at chemistry too. I was good at physics. I always watched enough Star Trek where physics was easy, but chemistry was just like, derp. I couldn't do anything.
Well, if it had been quantum physics, I would have been fine. But anyway, but what was I saying? Oh, so they're not even close. But I said, but who is close? Is one Mr. Saul Goodman, who turns out to, once again, be maybe sharper than everyone seems to be realizing. I mean, he makes a reference that his PI charged him for like 3 hours to track down Walt. And you know who that PI must be, but we're not going to get to him yet. But after they have their little meeting there in the classroom, and Walt asks just what it is that Saul is offering. This is where you realize just how important that this scene is, because this scene is what sets in motion the major plot lines that are going to fill the next 2 seasons and reverberate through the final season as well, not to mention, a future scene. And it ends in that little funny, it's almost like a commercial tagline for him. It's a perfect way to end the episode, and it says it all. So if you want to make more money and keep the money that you make, better call Saul. You can't come up with a better way to end an episode than that. It's such a good episode. In fact, that episode finished number 6 on my greatest Breaking Bad episodes of all time list. So there you go. That's really it, actually. We can move on to another iconic episode if you like, Dan.
Sure.
Yeah, Scott, let's do that. So now let's move on to the 9th episode, which is possibly just as iconic as I just said, and that would be 4 Days Out. It was directed by the reigning queen of Breaking Bad directors, Michelle MacLaren, and written by Sam Catlin. The title is pretty self-explanatory, so we can just get right to that first scene, which is the waiting room, and the family is there. And it's Marie. And Marie has to once again exert her I know better than you qualities once again. I find characters like that, there must be a lot of fun to write for, because they're so blissfully they have no self-awareness at all. She has no self-awareness whatsoever. Unlike anyone else on that show. She has no idea the way she comes off to people. She can be annoying and she can be funny, but it makes her a great character, I think, as a result.
Yeah.
I also loved, well, I shouldn't say I didn't love this, but I guessed, and then I looked up to confirm it after, I'm watching that episode, I'm looking at how she has this really huge purple bag is on her lap. And then I was looking at the scene, I was looking at her face, which looks a little bit more full than I thought it should. And like, oh, I think Anna Gunn at this point in time, she's playing someone who is pregnant, but Betsy Brandt, who's Marie, actually is pregnant. And then I looked it up online, and like, that actually was true. That Betsy Brandt was, of the two of them, Betsy Brandt was the actual pregnant one, and they just kind of keep coming up with ways to cover it up. This is just one of those scenes where it's really obvious. And since I guess you can call that a little detail to a certain degree, one of the things I love about this series altogether is the little tiny details. They're just, you catch them when you're watching the show really closely. And for me, it's almost like, if something has a certain kind of odd little, almost like a tactile nature to it, it's like, oh, that's a nice little touch there. So like we're talking about Walt going in to be tested. Just when I'm looking at, there's that weird cheap pink foam that's used to cushion his head when he's being slid inside the machine. Or those odd little special socks, which I remember having to wear socks like that. Only mine were yellow, those are blue, but they look the same otherwise, that they make you wear when you're in a medical facility or whatever. I was just like, oh, I really like these little details. And then I got really impressed by the robe they give you at this lab, which is like, wow, that is, no wonder this guy is costing you so much money. They usually just give you're usually wearing like almost like a plastic sheet. And here they're giving you this, it looks like a robe you get in a hotel. Very impressed by it. I like things like that. I like a good robe. And also, I should point out, and that it cannot be a coincidence, because in the waiting room, you had Marie doing her spiel, because, she's one of those X-ray techs who thinks they know better than the doctors. And in this scene, you have a technician that, unlike Marie, he's humble. He's aware of what his job is supposed to be and what he should be saying and whatever, unlike Marie. But unfortunately for Walt, Walt just makes an assumption based on a reflection he sees in the glass. It's a reflection of his scan. And he sees this, I would call like the snarling white cluster. It looks like a poisonous carnation that's right over his left lung. And from that point on, Walt assumes, death is imminent. We cut to a scene with Walt and Saul. And by the way, this taking back to something we've talked about a bunch of times, and a mistake I had made a few times. I think you're the one I'm podcasting with usually, so you were the one to correct me on it. You know how when we would discuss Jimmy McGill's car and the early goings of Better Call Saul, I kept screwing up, and I would constantly refer to it as a Subaru instead of a Suzuki, which is
yes.
Actually, I'm gonna pin that. I'm gonna blame it on this. Because I think my memory kept going back to this scene here, where Saul figures out, the cost of money laundering, $16,000 minus his fee. And he says it'll leave Walt just enough to buy a secondhand Subaru. And for some reason, that just stuck in my head. And so whenever I think of him having a car, the one that he has in Better Call Saul, my mind just for some reason goes right to Subaru instead of Suzuki. Although they do, sound alike, but not sound similar, but trying to come up with an excuse for my screwing up from years ago, whatever. But I mean, maybe my mind just thought they were just doing it as a joke on Better Call Saul referring to that, but no, my brain just made that up, so whatever. All right. So what do we have here? Oh, Walt coming up with the perfect cover for Disappearing this weekend. You know what? Tell your wife you're going to go see your mother, especially if you know she's a woman that your wife would never call herself. Or would she? I kept thinking, the way Walt's life seems to work, the only crazy thing that could happen that would screw things up is if his mom called while he was away. I'm almost surprised that didn't happen. But then we bounce back over to Jesse and Jane because they're using that mattress now. Now that he even has bedding, and I noticed that his bedding is in sync with his place on the Breaking Bad color wheel. I know we haven't talked about it on these few podcasts as of yet, but I know you are well versed in this, and I think a lot of our listeners know about it as well. How Breaking Bad has a very specific and definite color wheel pattern. Color specific to characters and what they represent, whether it be Hank, Walt, Jesse, Skyler, Marie, or whomever. But Jesse, although he does wear a lot of red, quite frankly, but his color is supposed to be yellow, and the sheets being like bright yellow kind of stands out really clearly here. And why yellow? But anyway, so Mr. White, as Jesse would call him, calls and convinces Jesse that they have to cook for 4 days straight. And he says it's because the barrel of methylamine is going to go bad or lose its potency or something. Obviously, that's a lie. Not sure why Walt couldn't have been honest with him here, but I guess it's going to be... I guess I do know why, but that'll come out later in the episode. Don't know why I questioned that. It wasn't in my notes. I should have stuck to my notes. By the way, when Skyler drops off Walt at the airport and he does his little game of, then she leaves and he comes back out, did anyone notice the announcement that's being made over the PA at the airport at the same time while he's there? It's talking about the white zone. So I thought that was kind of like, it's like, oh, that's interesting. That's another one of those things I didn't notice in my previous rewatch of it before. And from there, we get a really nice traveling montage. You got your time-lapse photography set to the tune "Good Morning Freedom." Be bow, 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 wow, wow, bow, whatever the hell it is. I really enjoyed that. I think I'm pointing it out because it's nice for them to do a montage when there's something really nicely bouncy about it, and it's not cut with like dark subversive images of like, the manufacturer selling of drugs, which is what a lot of these things tend to be if they're not just clouds rushing across the, a night or day sky or something. At this, it just looks like there are two guys going for a camping trip somewhere, even though we know it's a cooking trip actually. But yeah, they're going on a Dan trip. Except they'd have a better vehicle.
Similar cuisine, though.
Yes. Speaking of that, because I mentioned when I was talking with Jamie in the previous podcast on Breaking Bad. One of the fun things about Jesse is every once in a while he has childlike tendencies that kind of pop up. Whether it be the food he arranges for a meeting or how he refers to himself as an outlaw, or whatever. And here it's the foods he chooses for when that you're going to be cooking for 4 days is Funyuns and gummy bears. I mean, I understand not bringing anything green, as well, but I would think, dude, you wouldn't pack a few sandwiches? You wouldn't, whatever. Just Funyuns and gummy bears for 4 days? Really? I mean, he's thin, but come on. Anyway, but and then we get one of those classic Walt and Jesse fighting, sniping, bickering with each other, and then we get what I like to call, and what many would call, the ticking bomb in the plot of the script, and that is when Jesse puts the keys back in the ignition, and which, unbeknownst to him, actually starts the engine of this vehicle. And once that happens, when we see that little light flicker, now we know, now I know what the point of this episode is going to be and where this is building up to. We do get another musical montage right after that. So it's kind of interesting to have two kind of, that close to each other in an episode. They usually don't do that. And this one is about the meth making. And you have that moment after they've made so much. And then Walt calculates just how much money they're going to make off this mountain of meth that they've made. And yes, the alliteration was deliberate there. I mention it because it's one of the only times, at least at this point in the series, and actually maybe, for the entire series, that these two share a real moment of joy with each other. I mean, they're high-fiving each other. They're making plans to go to a Denny's. They're gonna go stay in a motel or something and rent separate rooms before they come back to finish the barrel, whatever. And that's when the joy is short-lived, because that's when they realize the RV battery has gone dead. So, Dan, I'm not a car guy, a truck guy, an RV guy. So I'll ask you: now, is it just specific to this type of vehicle, an RV? Should Jesse have known better than to put the keys in the ignition?
I don't think so. I mean, I haven't had a car where I have to actually have an ignition key for 15 years. But with my keys, I just have them somewhere in the vehicle, and then the car works. But no, this isn't something that I'm aware of. Normally, you have to put a key in and turn it to accessory for it to be battery and stuff. So it just doing that doesn't. I'm not really sure why there'd be a blinking light in the first place. To tell you. It's not like this old RV would have I'm not really sure why I would do that, but it might have something to do with it just being an RV and being old.
I think it must be, my guess was it's an RV thing as opposed to your standard car or truck or whatever. Maybe something to do with it being a vehicle / home kind of a thing, or maybe it's the year of the model. So I'll cut them slack to that degree, but there is part of me that says, why wouldn't you just toss them on the dashboard or on the other seat or leave them in your pocket of your jacket that you just took off? Why would you again? I know I'm giving a break because I don't think if it had been a car and you left your keys in the ignition, that wouldn't happen unless you turned it and then you'd know that because you would be starting the engine. So
it's a little contrived, but not too bad.
I'm gonna give it a break because I figure I'm gonna assume I have to leave me out of it because I'll be bringing myself up later anyway. I'm going to assume they did the research on this to make sure that it would work, that it would work that way. At least because I feel that they would have, because it's so important to the plot of this episode They can get, if it's a throwaway thing, it doesn't really matter. They probably wouldn't care. But this is so vital to it. You wouldn't want it being aired. Then 18 different writers the next day reviewing the episode say, well, it turns out that would never happen, So, but I could be wrong. But, I don't have Vince Gilligan here or Sam Caitlin here to ask. So I won't slam him for being an imbecile the way Walt does. There will be other things he does that deserve that kind of thing. Like, I don't know, trying to put out the generator fire with the last of their water when they have a working fire extinguisher right there that he should know they have. That maybe deserves a kind of a, what are you thinking? I would have been like, you're in a desert. Why don't you just grab handfuls of sand and throw it on it then? Why use your water? But anyway, eventually Walt gives Jesse his phone to use briefly so he can get Skinny Pete to come find them. Again, I'm sorry. We've met Skinny Pete a number of times at this point. When you're listening to Jesse talk to him and give him instructions and directions, I should say, does anyone think that Skinny Pete is really going to be able to follow all that? I don't even know if I could follow it. Skinny Pete? I mean,
those directions are garbage.
Later on, I love that they're talking about apparently they're talking about drinking urine. And my first take on that was like, didn't they do that in a Stephen King story once? I feel like there's a short story that a character actually has to drink his own piss at one point. Maybe the same character who ends up eating himself. Maybe it's the Ladyfingers one. Anyway, there's another phone call. And of course, as I was just saying, we realize Skinny Pete has gone over a river somewhere, which means he's way off course. And of course, that's when the phone goes dead. Even the lantern soon follows suit. It's clearly not a Chuck McGill style lantern. So they have to figure out some way to get that engine started. So they decide, they need to restart the generator by hand crank, which obviously goes on for hours and hours and hours in the hot sun. And so long that up until one point where Jesse checks on Walt, who's splayed out in a chair like a dead man. And when Walt goes into one of those coughing jags of his, this is when Jesse actually shows he's not so dumb after all, because he puts it together. That methylamine does not spoil. And that is not the reason that they're out there. So, like I said earlier, part of me, and Jesse is, at least to a reasonable degree, empathetic because of what happened with his aunt and all the other stuff. And that is why I kept thinking, Walt, you could have just told him. You guys know enough about each other, but there's still, I guess, despite what Walt will say in a later episode, it feels like there's still certain trust issues, or Walt still thinks he can do better on a lie than the truth, which is what he keeps doing in his life anyway, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So they get the generator charge up, which works for a few seconds. And I think at that point, Jesse is like despondent. He's wondering why he didn't just go to Santa Fe with Jane to look at the vagina paintings. And that's when he realizes Mr. White is gone. And he finds him several yards away from the RV. He's kneeling with blood on his hands from another violent coughing fit. And that's when you have Walt, and after that, you have Walt just ruminating on all his lies. Which is interesting because it's one of the few times over the course of the series where you actually have Walt actually seemingly having regrets over how many times he's lied. But that's when Jesse's, getting ready wants to leave to go try to walk to wherever. Walt basically tells Jesse if he tries to walk back to civilization, he'll be dead within the hour. And Jesse just wants Walt to think of something science-y. And which is what leads to Walt being inspired to build a battery. One of my favorite scenes in the episode by far, I think, is the whole battery thing. I think it's just such a nice scene overall. A lot of it, I think, is because class is in session. Walt is showing Jesse how to make a battery cell. And you can have it. It's kind of lovely that they're doing that in the episode. And then you even have that little famous little moment when he's kind of like doing a little test pop quizzes with Jesse, and Jesse says wire instead of an actual element like copper, which is a pretty funny moment. And it works. they get the RV running, they're up and going. We do get a brief moment at the airport when Jesse drops Walt off, when Jesse promises no matter what happens, Walt's family will get his share. So you realize, if not other than making all the meth, there actually was a shared bonding experience between these two due to this. I think there will be at least one more RV related bonding experience between these two. But this is kind of like the big one, I would say. And we cut away from the airport to Walt and the family, just as we saw them in the beginning. That's when he gets the news about his scans. And that's when he finds out that he's actually in remission. The tumor is shrunk by 80%. And it turns out that bad cough of his is just a common form of radiation pneumonitis, which means that ugly thing that Walt spotted in the reflection, it was simply tissue inflammation. And that leads to another kind of famous thing about the episode. When we go back to the restroom, and then when Walt beats the bejesus out of that towel dispenser. Now, there has been, I think there's room for a little bit, even having, and this is interesting. I like that we can watch a series. We've watched this series from beginning to end already. Many times, actually. But you can still theorize about certain things, even though we know how, plot-wise and things turn out. And this is one of those moments. The reason why Walt beats the crap out of the towel dispenser. Because I feel like there's a few different explanations for it. And it's just interesting seeing the one that people tend to go with. I mean, there could be, is it the realization that maybe, his further plunge down the criminal path was unnecessary? Maybe. I don't think so. Maybe the realization that the one sure way out of his unending stream of lies and deceit, with his ebbing morality as well, was going to be his impending death. That was going to be, and now that's really probably being taken off the table here. Maybe. It could be. I've heard that one. I've heard a version of that a lot over the years. One of the ones I kind of think along is, this is about how everything he had planned out, and it's just that this kind of disrupts his control of the situation. And it's, in a way, it's almost signaling a possible return to what his life was like before. I feel that might be a bit more closer to it than any other thing. I mean, do you feel it's one of those three, or is it something a little bit of this and a little bit of that?
I think it's most likely that just he doesn't have an excuse to do this new dangerous criminal shit anymore, because he kind of enjoys it. Right.
And and it kind of takes us all the way to, you literally have to get to the very last episode, and when he talks about the reason he did this, spoiler, he did it for himself. You can trace that all the way to here, because he realized, no, this was all about that. And that's why he's upset forever. That makes a lot of sense. Let's see, any trivia about this episode? It's interesting that this is actually Aaron Paul's personal favorite Breaking Bad episode. And also, another little bit of trivia I dug out of, I don't know, probably IMDb or something. As iconic an object as it probably is in all of Breaking Bad is, the RV. And yeah, we are going to see that RV again, of course. It's actually one of my favorite episodes. This is going to be the last, or is it one of my favorite? I don't know. This is going to be the last time we're ever going to see them cook meth in the RV. That is not going to happen again on the show. And, but that little top 25 list of mine, this episode came in number 8. So these two both hit my top 10. That's how much I love these episodes. Anything else about this one before I move on to the next one?
No, they used some more long, telephoto photography for the episode while they're out in the desert. And I like that once again in the in the previous one. Of course, it's a lot different. Has a more different effect here because they're not in town; they're just kind of out doing whatever. But I still like how they use that.
You know what's interesting about that? I'm going to pick up on something you're saying here. I think you'll appreciate. What's interesting about this episode and the way a lot of it is shot is on one hand, one could almost, not quite, you could almost make the case that this it almost qualifies as a bottle episode because so much of it takes place either on the RV or directly outside. It's bookended by things that take place beyond that, I know. But they take up very little time in the overall series. The bulk of it, more than half the episode, maybe 60, 70, 75% of the episode takes place there. You could make the case it sort of falls under that category. But what's interesting about that is at the same time, up until this point, I might say it's the most cinematically shot episode of all of them.
Yeah.
The shots of and not just because look, it's a big sky kind of thing. I mean it's the variance of the shots of where they shoot the RV in the desert, all the different types of lenses that they use, and it really although I think we both think that this is probably one of the best looking shows pretty much ever on television. And not that it wouldn't work for any of the previous, whatever number, this is number 9, so we had 7. So the previous 16 or 17 episodes. This is the first one that I would say, I bet that would look really nice in a movie theater. That would look really nice in a movie theater.
It's just cool because, Vince Gilligan, really studied film history and stuff like that, and they're really into stuff like that. So, it's nice when he sees, some techniques that were used in the past. I mean, and this shooting with long lenses I think it was Kurosawa did that prominently, pretty much before most whatever. I mean, that was just kind of something that he did. I think for the most part, it wasn't done a lot, shooting with 400 or 500 millimeter from far away, because it has such a different effect. So I just kind of seeing, him just respecting what he's learned and applying that to this cool new thing and then making it awesome.
Right. Absolutely. It is interesting when you watch, whether it be, this applies to both episodes of television or even films, especially films early in any director's career, where not that they're necessarily mimicking or doing an homage or whatever, but you can trace back the roots of what you're watching to, I see that they were inspired by this, or this. I see a little bit of David Lean here, or I see a little bit of Kubrick there, or I see, and so on and so forth. Just picking two that probably have a huge impact on directors of a subsequent generation. Obviously David Lean, your favorite, Lawrence of Arabia, had a massive impact on people like Spielberg and so on and so forth. Okay.
Yeah.
I love talking about shit like that. But now we're going to talk about the 10th episode of the season, which is called Over. Now, oddly enough, this is the only episode directed by Phil Abraham. And now, Phil Abraham, he is one of those MVP TV directors. This dude, his first directing gig, was an episode of Sopranos. So if that's your starting point, wow. Guy has directed numerous episodes of everything from Ozark to Orange is the New Black. And we have talked about him on this podcast before because this is the guy who's directed not 1, not 5. He's directed 15 different Mad Men episodes. So we like this guy a lot. And and it was again written by Moira Wally Beckett, who I already gushed about on a previous podcast. She is one of them. She might not have written the most episodes of Breaking Bad, but she's written some of the most important episodes of Breaking Bad.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we have an episode that begins with one of those black and white cold opens, which also means that the title Over is going to figure into that phrase that is sprinkled throughout the season, which, the big reveal at the end, but 737 and so on and so forth. But here we're back to that sad bear. And beyond that, we see the reflection of the guys in their hazmat suits collecting evidence. But we eventually build to what at this point is the most eerie image of all. It's first seen through the clear, I would say, the spider webbing of a shattered windshield. But when the camera pulls back, we see the anonymous text hovering over what appears to be 2 body bags next to Walter White's Aztec. So at this point, if you've never seen the show before, you're like, oh my God, who could that be? And, it turns out, nobody.
Yeah.
But bunch of schmucks flying in one of two planes, apparently. So we'll skip from that. After Skylar, who apparently has not noticed that her husband has really badly bruised knuckles, after she has convinced Walt to stay home for the rest of the week, maybe conserve his energy for this little celebratory shindig that she's planning for the weekend, restless Mr. White just can't stay put. So he pings Jesse and they meet over lunch. It's interesting to watch their emotional reactions during their conversation because Jesse is clearly more excited about Walt's health news than Walter himself. And Walt does not really seem all that happy about eventually getting out of the meth business. I mean, we all know this, but it's kind of just watching it actually play out in a scene where it's being discussed is kind of fun. Because this is one of those, well, then you can't really be surprised by anything that happens from this point on, I would say. So let's get to that party. And because it's got a major scene in it that's really deserves some conversation. And we're talking about the scene with Hank. I'm gonna go back and forth to be like call him Flynn or not, but here I'm gonna call him Flynn. Hank, Flynn, Walt, and the tequila. I remember I was saying earlier about the Hank and Walt scenes become more and more interesting throughout the show, and what they really and when you look at them in retrospect and you put them all together, what they kind of represent here. This scene with Walt, it's about his pent up rage. Those thoughts that I actually discussed this in the previous podcast about Hank can be seen at times as overstepping, as perhaps being a stronger father figure. And the fact that he also represents, as we said, the authorities that Walt is actually defying in the drug trade. It all kind of comes to kind of an unexpected head here. And unfortunately for Flynn, he ends up in sort of kind of being the collateral damage that Walt doesn't seem to really even care about at this point. This is one of when you're referring to Walt being a douchebag, you I guess you could go to this scene as one of your examples if you wanted. It's one of those scenes that just, as it builds, the fact that, again, it's one of those, I've seen this scene before, I've seen this many times before, it still makes me uncomfortable as I watch it.
It just makes you cringe the farther you go into it. And
there's a decision that's made it would be a cringy, whatever scene, just by the fact he keeps pouring the tequila for his kid, and Hank tries to get involved, and Walt gets pissed off, and it's the first time Walt speaks that way to Hank, which is very interesting. And if it had just ended with that, and then like the kid suddenly just keeling over and puking in the pool, that would have been it's still a great scene. What puts what's my friend's phrase for stupid scripting we do? Oh, button. What puts the button on the scene as a ooh is, even while all that's going on and Walt Jr. / Flynn is, up chucking in the pool, whatever, Walt is still taking a seat and he's smugly drinking another shot while all that's happening. That's like, ooh. That's a dick move. It's a boss move. I don't know what to call it, but it's something that just makes you kind of go. It just raises it to like, ooh, that's nasty. That's nasty. So then we skip to Sunday morning, and we have Jane and Jesse, and I like there's a little reference here when he's making her huevos rancheros, and he says to her, "You weren't supposed to wake up," and she says, "Ever?" And I went, oh, wow, they were calling their shot early on this one, weren't they? We discovered that Skylar is at work, and Walt's probably a little hungover, and clearly he's in the doghouse for his behavior. He even leaves a message for Skylar. I think she only half hears because she starts chatting with Ted instead. We do notice, though, back in the kitchen, the sink's water is brown. We actually noticed that earlier in the episode in the bathroom, the water was brown, but Walt didn't seem to focus on it much, but he certainly focuses on it here when he sees the kitchen sink water like that. It's the damn water heater. I think we brought this up when we talked about the season 1. I like to call it Chekhov's water heater, because they keep bringing it up. You're going to have to finally get around to using it for something, so here we go. Walt's now going to do something about it. He's going to go buy a new one, regardless of the cost. He's going to install it his own damn self. But, one thing he needs to know not to do is maybe don't try to pass 20s with blood on them. Although I kept thinking, wait, wasn't this money supposed to have been laundered already? Shouldn't it have been literally laundered to avoid like blood splatters on your money? Did you forget to call Saul? I don't know. So then we bounce over to Jane and Jesse again. It's funny, I'm calling them Jane and Jesse instead of Jesse and Jane. Don't know why I'm doing that. They're looking through his old sketchbook of superheroes that he made up when he was like a kid, And I love it. He's like, I made this one as a kid, 4 years ago. And it's like, oh God, Jesse, I keep forgetting how fucking young you're supposed to be right now. My favorite one of those is the one that he calls. Ooh, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. The one that he calls what?
Oh, I'm just going to let everyone know. I don't know if that came through on the podcast or not. It was kind of awesome, so I almost hope it did. We record via Skype. We just got a thing that said poor connection. There was a big boop, boop, boop. It was like, it sounded like a submarine letting off a siren or something. So I didn't know if it cut up. But no, we'll see. It'll be interesting to hear on the podcast. The name of the character that I thought, Backwardo, that he eventually renamed Rewindo. And his power is basically he just walks backward. I thought it'd be like a time thing. It's like, no, he just walks backward. And I kept looking, and I was thinking, well, you should have said it was Rewindo, then I named it Backwardo, and then she said, it'd be Retardo if that's such a bad power. Oh yeah, I used the R word, so now we just lost like 3 listeners. Sorry, guys. Anyway, so Jane's dad shows up. You've been waiting for him to show up. And
yes.
And we'll obviously be talking about him, well, it's John Delancey as you and your beloved Q from Star Trek and so on. We'll be talking more about him later in the podcast for sure. But in this scene, it's the thing where she basically treats Jesse like she doesn't know him beyond him being her next door neighbor, tenant, whatever. And Jesse seems to have a kind of an adverse reaction to that. And I'm sorry, Jesse. And look, I'm not an anti-Jesse person at all. He has become the guy we're supposed to care about or root for eventually in this series. But I don't have any sympathy for him here. Because he knows Jane's story, at least to a certain extent. And he knows the house belongs to her dad and that she's managing it. So there is no way in the world she would want her dad to know that she has any kind of involvement with the tenant next door. So him acting like he was slighted or something, I'm sorry, it's beyond me. Or, it's just, to me, it's just dumb. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I get where it's coming from, but he's moved way too fast and he isn't really thinking about it clearly.
Yes, right. And then later, Walt does make, I would say, a sincere apology to his son. And of course, it has to be a sincere apology, because that's the kind of apology that doesn't register with the kid, because he's just proud that he was able to keep up with Dad and Uncle Hank when it came to drinking tequila. And I was like, oh, maybe it's a reminder, like, that's right, you're just a kid. Of course, that's the way you're going to be thinking about it. And with the water heater, that's at some point Walt notices the floor has a certain soggy give to it, which certainly looks like the beginning of an even bigger home project. Now, back to Jesse. I mean, while Jesse should get the Jane's reasoning for acting as if she barely knew him, when her dad was there, he should totally get that. She takes it too far. When she says, "Who's you and me?" to him when he's talking about their relationship, that falls under the needlessly cruel thing. That was like, ooh, that's meaner than things Walt usually says to people. That was a very bitchy thing to say that she did to him there. As we move through the episode, we again get some little bit of time-lapse visual that basically tells us later that day. We see Walt is shopping at that Rax Building Supply place again. And then later when he's under the house, discovering the rot underneath. And again, I didn't hate this at all, but I do have to call out the writers just a teensy bit. And you know what? And I would be me, and a million other people would be just as guilty. So I shouldn't say I'm calling them out. I'm just going to say, hey guys, not the most subtle of metaphors there. Oh, there's rot under the foundation of your house. Oh, what? Oh, wow. Where'd you come up with that one? What could that symbolize? I thought you'd appreciate that. So then we skip back to Skylar. She's still at work, and she tearfully confesses in Ted that despite receiving the good news about Walt's health, it still feels as though nothing has changed. And that's about the way Walt has taken the news and the way he's continuing to act towards and around others. That is also when we get our first official hint that there might be something up with the books at Benecke's. But we're certainly going to get into that a lot more in a later episode. So wait for it, guys, because I know you're excited to hear about that. But you should be. But Monday morning, Walt is still in fungus fighting mode. Screw teaching kids anymore. There's rot to be removed. And at the same time, what do you want to say something?
Well, it's nice because several seasons later, he's going to be like, pretty much doing that kind of for their fake job, killing termites before they can fucking rot out the house.
Right. Is he, correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't write this down. He is wearing a mask when he's doing this stuff, isn't he?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that he's actually using something that he associates with his drug business as something he's using around the house. It's an interesting little connection there, almost as if he's more at home, in that mode than what he's been otherwise. I just pulled that right out of my ass. Anyway, Jesse gets a little something slipped under his door. It's Apology Girl, and I remember thinking, wow. She's a good artist, and I realized that's not the actor. They probably just hired someone to do that. But Skylar is clearly craving the attention that she gets from Ted, because when you see her actually knocking shit over in her office to get his attention. So,
yeah.
And again, part of me is wondering: is this, like I said, with some stuff that happened in the first half of the season? Are these the points that the anti-Skylar people were using when they really were so against her? And part of me goes, guys, could you be married to the way this guy has been acting and just be a mouth and just be totally okay with that, or not look elsewhere for attention and affection? Are you kidding me? Come on.
Trust me, those guys aren't married.
Yeah. So back at Rack's, that supply place, I noticed that Walt, his next visit there, he's wearing a different colored shirt, a darker colored shirt. Maybe something that's just a little bit Heisenberg-y. And I love that he's carrying 2 cans of Kills primer paint. And yes, that is an actual brand, I know. I did have to look it up just because I was curious. And nope, that's a real thing. They got their website and everything. But you pick... What, say it?
Yeah, that's kind of like the main primer maker. So.
Oh, absolutely. But you're using it. You're using that product in this shot because it says it's Kills. I mean, come on. You don't. If it had been if they had 2 cans of Dutch Boy, it wouldn't have the same kind of funny effect. That's why you're going with Kills here. And I think we build to what I think is another really key scene, which by Breaking Bad standards. It's a key scene in an episode which is fairly light. There's not as much going on here as we get in other episodes. But it's Walt recognizing that some dork's cart is filled with the makings of what would make a meth cook. And except, I guess the guy had bought the wrong type of matches, and Walt tries to instruct him on which type to get, and the guy just bolts out of the store like a scared rabbit instead of listening to all these little pointers that Walt is handing out here. But after Walt has a moments of reflection as that scanner is beeping over people's purchases, and maybe the beeping of the scanner reminds him of the equipment at the lab when he was going to be scanned himself, I don't know. Walt abandons the cans of Kills, and he flips the switch into his seething mode. Only it's not tequila which is causing it now. It's what I would say it's Heisenberg asserting his power. When he goes up to these now 2 guys who are out in the parking lot, it's that tweaker who ran out of there and this more thickly built thug, and he just barks at them to stay out of my territory. And they do it. They use this TV and the radio song called DLZ, which is just a perfect score for the scene because the lyrics talk about like a death professor and crystallizing. It's just a really nice bit of music that's just so perfect for the moment. And I think it's a super important moment because despite the fact that we know that Walt is in remission, this is Walt officially declaring that his days of Heisenberg are not done. He's not letting go yet. It's not over. That's the title. Boo-boo. There you go. By the way, boo-boo is not in my notes. I just said it. So, I mean, to me, it's definitely not, it's not in the upper tier of Breaking Bad episodes, but it's got a couple great moments, and I think that's one of them for me personally.
Oh yeah, that's just good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically we're kind of just biding our time and now I think from the next episode on, things kind of kick into a much higher gear. And that next episode, of course, is Mandala. I hope I pronounced that right. It's directed by Adam Bernstein and written by George Mastras. We've discussed both of them at length on this podcast. So let's get to the title of the episode. Title being Mandala. One ancient definition of that is essentially circle. It's what it means in Sanskrit. And in terms of this episode, it's the circle of life and death because it begins with a death and essentially ends with a birth. So let's start with that death. Beginning, it's a kid kills Combo. It's what's really important about the scene, other than the plotting of we killed a dealer and everything and the chain reaction of what that leads to, whatever. But I think for us as viewers, unless I'm forgetting something, I do tend to forget things. I'm getting old. I think it's the first death of a character that's kind of like quote unquote on our side. So in a way, it becomes like the first shock that we get of that nature. Although, I mean, killing Combo does not have the same kind of impact as if they had executed, say, Skinny Pete or Badger, because we've spent more time with them. There, I don't know if we liked them more or not. That's kind of a mean thing to say, but you know what I mean. But I think the shock is still heightened because it's not only that they killed this character that we know that we were kind of, he's one of our guys, and the way the blood's pulling out from him. And it's the fact that it was done by a child. That really, the only place you see stuff like that is like maybe on The Wire. But other than that, it's not something so I think those kind of things combined to make, I think when people saw that for the first time, you were like, oh my God, at least that's the way I took it. So we go from there to Walt meeting with some doctors. We meet Dr. I don't know if it's pronounced Bravenek or Bravenek. I'll say Bravenek. I'm actually this is going to be one of the weirdest tangents ever on this podcast. At least on a Breaking Bad, I guess. Now, Bravenek, he's played by Sam McMurray. This is an actor, you, me, we've all seen this guy in a million other things over the past 40 years. And yes, and right now it's actually fun for some people to point out, he also appeared as a cancer surgeon in season 3 of The Sopranos, but that's not what I want to bring up. And there's a lot of shows that we both like that he's shown up on. I'm not bringing up any of those. I'm not bringing up another TV show or movie at all. My personal favorite credit that this guy has in his very long acting CV. When he was a much younger man, he actually did a number of the voices that were used on the Empire Strikes Back radio series that was done back in the early 80s. And I listened to both the Star Wars and the Empire Strikes Back when they were done back when I was a kid. They were amazing. The only original cast members who appeared on those things were like Mark Hamill, Anthony Daniels, and Billy D. Williams, actually. But it was great because you had like Perry King as Han Solo. And the thing I didn't know until I started to dig deeper, and it's a great trivia question, so you heard it here first. If you want to really stump somebody, try to get them to guess who played Yoda on the original Empire Strikes Back radio series drama, which are great little radio. I'll tell you because there's it's impossible. John Lithgow was Yoda. Huh. John Lithgow. If you'd given me 100 guesses, I never would have guessed that. especially in this was done back in like 82, 83. You know, I mean, this is just at the early stages of Lithgow's career. He'd done Terms of Endearment, I think, around then. I think he appeared in some other thing. I think he was in a Brian De Palma movie before that, whatever. But
I think he's in Blowout.
I think, yeah, right, that's the one. But again, Yoda, I have, before this year is out, I do have to make a point of tracking down some of those episodes. I got to hear the voice he did. I'm dying to hear how Lithgow did a Yoda voice. Like, did he try to do a Frank Oz-like voice? Did he just do something else? You know, this guy's done everything from Churchill to Third Rock from the Sun, whatever. I want to know what he did. Okay, let's get out of the Star Wars universe. Let's get to the Breaking Bad universe here. Then back to the scene. We find out that this doctor and Walt's own oncology doctor, Dr. Del Cavoli, some of this he has an Italian-sounding name. He clearly does not look Italian. Anyway, they now believe that Walt would be a candidate for a lobectomy, which would be removing the tumor from his lung, the cancer from his lung, not his brain, which is the first thing I think of when you hear lobe. It would be a way to really cut out the cancer once and for all. The problem is that the procedure like this is going to run you $170,000 to $200,000. But Walt quickly agrees to it, which is much to Skylar's worried surprise. Again, I think one of my issues of watching the show, you know how I know that you have a tendency you tend to relate to characters at times when they're going through certain things in their life that you yourself have experienced, maybe relationship things or family things or what have you. I do it with financial things. And issues like crazy medical bills out of nowhere over the last year plus, not these kind of numbers, but by the same token, like, what am I supposed to do to pay for that? I mean, I'm not making meth or anything, but I've had that thought even this summer. So I was feeling Skylar's worries here.
Yeah. Now you gotta, including selling stuff on eBay.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Something I have in common with her. Anyway, Walt checks his secret phone. 14 messages. He calls Jesse, and that's when he finds out later that Combo's dead. He's been shot. Which one was he? And that's when Jesse hangs up on him. Okay, Jesse, again, I'm not getting on you. I understand why you're upset. You should be. But let's cut Walt a little bit of slack. He met the three of them maybe once. He knows Badger is Badger or Beaver. He's not even sure about that. The other two names he's heard is Skinny Pete and Combo. How hard is it to figure out which one is which? I don't know. Whatever.
He just doesn't, treats people like, disposable. In some cases, he just literally doesn't care.
Yeah.
He thinks they're losers. Jesse's a loser for doing whatever and just has more use for him. But he just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah,
that's why he's so, willing to, let Saul execute Badger.
It's the way we feel about other podcasters. Or, no, that's not true.
Listeners.
Listeners, yeah. Or both.
Talk about CJ for a while.
Actually, it's the way we feel about other podcasters who also listen. No, just kidding. Speaking of Skinny Pete, he also has about as pretty meaty a scene as we've seen him have with Jesse here. Because with Combo dead and Badger apparently has been laying low out of state, I guess it was because he got busted by the DEA or whatever. Skinny Pete at this point, he wants out of the dealing biz. It's not just because he's on probation, which he's brought up a few times here, but it's because now it turns out everybody in town knows it wasn't Jesse who smushed Spooge's head with an ATM. So this brings us to an eagerly awaited meeting, at least for me, and probably a number of viewers, with Walt, Jesse, and Saul. And I don't know why I could have made this point during the Better Call Saul episode, but I'm doing it here instead because this is where it clicked in my head. It's an observation I've never made before. And that doesn't mean it's momentous, so I apologize if I built it up too much to here. It's about Saul's little strip mall office of his. It's one of the more iconic things about the show. It's one of the things we're kind of waiting for them to, if they ever will get to it on Better Call Saul or not, we don't know. And, I'm sure a million people have commented or chuckled at things over the years, like that inflatable Statue of Liberty on top, or the columns in the Constitution decor of his office. These are all ridiculous, over-the-top things for sure. But you know what's almost as silly, and not exactly subtle either, and I've never heard anyone make a mention of it before? Go look at the location, and specifically the sign, the storefront sign that he's got out there, under the Statue of Liberty, the one that just has like the cursive logo, Better Call Saul, emblazoned across it. But it's also got this giant blue... Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, my voice is echoing back. That's so disorienting. It's got this giant blue arrow pointing down towards, I guess, presumably the entrance of the location. Go, if you've never really thought about it, go take a look at it. It's the most incredibly unnecessary, stupid thing to have on a storefront. It makes it funny because no store or location would ever have that. It would be like being given an ice cream cone with a tag on it that says "lick here" at the top of the scoop. It's like, you don't really need someone's in front. They don't need the arrow to tell you where a giant arrow is pointing to the door. Like right here, walk through here. I never noticed it before. I don't know how I never noticed it before. And I'm staring at it and I'm like going, that's the dumbest thing ever. Anyway. So back to that scene with Walt explaining to Saul that one of their dealers was shot and everybody quit, which really technically is just one person, but whatever. So therefore they have no distribution. Now let's pick up that conversation from there because especially as it's going to lead to a pretty major plot development and character introduction in the overall Breaking Bad universe. So let's give a listen here.
One of our dealers was murdered. Some kind of turf dispute, and apparently we lost. And everyone quit on us. I mean, we have absolutely no distribution.
Is there any way any of this can be traced back to you? Or the police I'm talking about? Well, there's your silver lining. How about you? How's the health situation?
It's better. Do you mind?
Better?
Yeah, it's looking a little more positive. I may have more time than I thought.
Outstanding. As to your dead guy, occupational hazard. Right. Drug dealer getting shot. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's been known to happen. Now, what about product on hand? How's your inventory?
38 and change.
38 ounces, grams?
Pounds.
You did say make hay while the sun is shining.
Guys, why the long faces here? I mean, you're sitting on a gold mine.
A gold mine we can't sell. We need a proper infrastructure. We need foot soldiers and we need dealers on a street level that are rock solid. We need muscle and we need enforcers. Payback, that's what we need. God. This entire process has just been so... It's always been one step forward and two steps back. We need your help.
Let's start with some tough love, all right? Ready for this? Here goes. You two suck at peddling meth, period. So give up on trying to do it all yourselves. Hell, I'm amazed you got this far.
Look, we are not going to deal with another high-level distributor. No, thank you. We have been down that road.
What, some tattooed speed freak? No. What you two need is an honest-to-God businessman, right? Somebody who treats your product like the simple, high-margin commodity that it is. Somebody who ships out of town, deals only in bulk. Someone who's been doing this for 20 years and never been caught.
You know someone like that?
Let's just say I know a guy who knows a guy who knows another guy. Let me make some calls, see if I can get you a meeting.
Well, what's his name?
I have no idea. He's very low profile. He's careful like that. You know, from what I do hear about him, he sounds a little like you.
Now, here's a question. At the time when this was written and filmed, was the same intention or lack of overall knowledge the same as we view it now after 5 seasons of Better Call Saul? And I realize I didn't say that I wasn't very articulate about that. Is it fair to say that Jimmy in Better Call Saul or Saul here actually doesn't realize who Gus Fring is? So that is consistent?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, he's met him, but I think there's always been some kind of degree of separation.
Right.
He's been more closely involved with the Salamanca side of the business,
right.
Other than Mike.
Right. I think you're right about that, because I think that Saul realizes that the not yet introduced Mike, we'll get to him in a couple episodes, he does not realize that he actually works for Gus Fring.
No, he just calls him his PI, and he just, well, yeah, I'm not sure if he even knows it, if he discovers it at some point in the series or not, that he,
right. It's actually one of the things that makes watching that with the upcoming final season of Better Call Saul very interesting, is like how well they really stick to that. So I guess it's fair to say it's more likely Saul believes, the again, not yet introduced Mike, like it's pretty much like he says, knows someone who works for this mystery man. Or as he says, knows a guy who knows a guy who knows another guy, whatever. So it's just one of the things I had to take a moment to think about it. And I remember like, okay, although he did his little assignments at Los Pollos Hermanos, whatever, it's like nothing on the show that we've seen as of yet would indicate that Jimmy knows anything about Gus Fring. And they're probably going to stick to that, because then that makes all this work perfectly. And,
right.
and there's no reason those worlds should necessarily collide anyway. Because if you think about it, why would Gus Fring even be associated with someone like Saul, on that level? He would definitely want, several people in between to kind of avoid anything.
Well, yeah. He's got his, big attorneys and shit in, Houston or whatever. So he doesn't need, Saul.
Right. Fleshing out someone like that. Okay, so then we bounce over to Jesse and Jane. See, I said it in the right order this time. Not the right order. But he needs her to go, because he wants to smoke some crystal to help deal with the pain of his guilt and the grief and everything. She does try to give him some other options, they can go to a meeting or just get out of the apartment. But he pretty much waves all that away, waves her away. He just wants her to leave because he knows that she's in the program. And she's about to leave. She's heading out the door. And then she turns and heads towards Jesse's bedroom. First he makes a bad choice, then she does.
Yeah, and of course, he's just, he's reacting to Combo's death, but sooner or later this would have happened regardless of that,
Right.
He would have, excuse to do it, and then she would have had an excuse to, instantly backslide. It's just what, it's just what they do. We've all seen it happen a million fucking times. It's just what happens.
It's
99, 100 anyway.
It's the nature of it all. But,
unfortunately.
Right. But at least we can get away from that rather sad situation to what makes any fan of this show and the show that came after so happy. We have our first ever visit to Los Pollos Hermanos. It's amazing. I love the fact that when we're at Los Pollos Hermanos, we notice that Gus is not wearing his customary yellow shirt the first time we ever see him. I actually remember thinking, because it's almost like his uniform in a way, because even though we've seen him wear other things at different points in time, obviously, a number of times, but that's his kind of in Los Pollos, that's kind of his iconic look,
Yes.
So I thought it was and I didn't remember that he had a different color on. So I remember just going, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, Walt is there all this time waiting to meet someone that never meets with him. The one person who does show up is Jesse. And let's just say the drugs did nothing to calm down a very jumpy Jesse, who is clearly skeptical of this whole deal. Now, some of what he says is a little dopey. I think he should understand why an actual drug king would want to keep his identity unknown as opposed to these two newbies. But he's pretty spot on with how he's reading Walt right now. How he knows that it's not just going to end here because there's always going to be some reason for him to keep on going. You called it, Jesse. You're 100% right. And then Jesse basically goes, I'm out of here. And obviously the person that Walt is going to meet up with never, at least as far as he knows, never shows up. We cut from that to Skylar's ultrasound. A day is chosen for what's going to be a C-section. And when the tardy Walt and Skylar are leaving the doctor's office, she decides she needs to go split to pick up a birthday cake for Ted. Okay, good. Bye, Skylar. So, but when Jesse comes home, and how much time has passed since, Jane and Jesse made the bad decision together? It's been less than a day, I think. It felt like it was. The place already looks like a frat house party has come and gone, or a slightly tidier crack house has taken over the joint. It's amazing how bad the place looks after such a short period of time.
Yes.
And he goes into the bedroom, he finds her asleep in bed, but then when she wakes up and he notices that she reaches for the pipe. The guilt that Jesse had about Combo's death was one thing, but now he's feeling that he's obviously more than partly responsible for Jane's descent back into drugs after she had been clean for over a year and a half. I'm not saying it's all his fault. She's ultimately made the decision, so it's her fault. But he does bear a certain amount of responsibility, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's her fault. I'm not giving her a break on it at all. But I understand him feeling bad about it is appropriate. In fact, it might, in some way, it could be more appropriate than feeling that way about Combo's death, where I don't think he should feel, so culpable about it. Blaming Walt is actually well placed. Walt is the one who wanted to move in on people's territory. And yeah, that's just the way I see it.
Right. I agree.
So, speaking of your favorite character, Ted's birthday, we find out the big thing that he wants to happen is he wants Skylar to sing like she did once before at an earlier birthday party. And that's when we get to see Skylar doing the Marilyn Monroe routine of "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" or whatever. Yeah, okay, that was cute. Although when she says, "I don't really look like her," and I said, "You think?" And again, you're a very attractive woman. Marilyn Monroe is Marilyn Monroe. It's just silly to even have said that. When Walt goes back to see Saul, that's when he finds out it's a no-go. The guy is apparently, as Saul puts it, the guy was skittish like a deer. He doesn't know exactly why, but the guy just decided, no, forget about it. But Walt, being the way Walt is, he drives back. He's frustrated. He's going back there. He's going to sit out the whole night. And that's when you notice Gus is there and he's wearing that trademark yellow shirt of his. And, day becomes light. So Walt must sit there for I don't know how many hours. And there's that one nice little moment. And it's that point where when Walt's looking out the window and you see Walt's reflection and Gus is in the background and you realize Walt can actually see him. And Gus takes a moment to look over in Walt's direction, and there's and all of a sudden you see it's the Gus Fring look. It's that stoic look before he starts to smile again. That is our first real peek at Gus, not including having seen him already. That's the real Gus is how I should say it. And I think that's when Walt realizes, oh, that's the guy, right?
Yes. And
that's what leads to their conversation. Oh. This. And when Fring's facade falls, it's like Giancarlo Esposito just flips a switch and he just goes into true Gus Fring mode, the stone cold Gus Fring mode. It's so good. And it's interesting having a character like that speaking to Walt for the first time. It's a very interesting back and forth between these two. And you realize that the issues are that Gus perceives that Walt has poor judgment, and that's because of Jesse. he can clearly see, just from when Jesse popped up that one time, this is a man who's clearly a drug addict and therefore cannot be trusted. It's kind of hard to disagree with that stance, especially as we see how things play out over the next couple episodes. It kind of proves his fucking point, actually. But I just really enjoy that scene a lot, you know.
Yeah.
And as for let's skip back to Birthday Boy, Skylar, Ted. This is after, you know, the cake's all chomped away at this point, but she's doing the books here. And now is when she's discovering so many examples of, I guess, let's say, revenue is being underreported. But not, you know, a little bit here, a little bit there. Hey, guess what? Turns out to be more than $1 million worth. Now, Dan.
Yo.
I believe you mentioned to me the other day that you actually had a bit of a theory relating to Ted, Skylar, and these books. That if you'd been able to appear on the previous podcast, I think you might have even mentioned it there, but you weren't able to appear. So what was your thinking on this again?
When I was watching the first scene with Ted earlier in season 2, I'm not sure which episode exactly, because I'd have to look through my notes, which I'm looking at right now. But I definitely got the distinct impression that, like, while there's, like, you know, some kind of, like, you know, he wanted to bang her tension going on there, I also think he, like, realized that, like, you know, he needed somebody to cook his book, so hiring an accountant that he already knows, who, like, is in kind of like a vulnerable state, is a situation that, like, he could take advantage of to help with this thing. So I think he hired her back with the distinct plan to, you know, not just maybe try to get up in that, but to you know, have her cook the books for him.
I think that's spot on. I think it's spot on. Yeah. And I think the fact that she was pregnant, which means more than likely he's laying a foundation for later banging, although maybe he's into banging pregnant chicks, as possible. But it's that's more
up, yo.
But it's also, but it goes to what you were saying about that puts her, and he doesn't even know about, like, at that point early on, he doesn't know about, like, the Walter's health issues and everything else. But just seeing a woman who needs to get a job and she's very, very pregnant means she's very, very vulnerable, which makes her an idea. And the fact, going along with what you were saying about, you know, someone who knows you, that you're friendly with, whatever, it all goes into, yeah, it's the perfect person for this.
Yeah, and he's not like, you know, he's not like a complete, you know, piece of crap. I mean, in the last episode, you know, he was giving her, like, genuinely good advice, but he's still, like, you know, he realizes he can use her, just like Walt realizes he can use Jesse, and sometimes he's nice to him, you know, it's just the same kind of thing.
Right. Absolutely.
Which is interesting because Skylar keeps getting involved with these, you know, criminal men. So he's just like, you know, she probably, like, thinks for a little bit that, like, you know, maybe he's, like, you know, going to be, you know, better and just like a nice, like, you know, a mirror of Walt. But, like, no, you're just looking at, like, the same person.
Right. That's true. So speaking, you mentioned Jesse, so let's get back to him. And he's at home. And it's after Skinny Pete has left a message describing Combo's funeral. And that's when Jane shows up. And she then proceeds to immediately introduce Jesse to what I would say is a far more insidious drug than meth. Yeah, we're talking heroin. And this results in, I would say, what's probably one of the most memorable, I hate overusing the word iconic, but I kind of feel, if you were putting a 1 minute montage of shots, scenes, whatever, from Breaking Bad, this is in that minute. It's the shot of Jesse experiencing heroin for the first time as he's floating above the room higher and higher. I mean, it's a beautifully composed shot. There are extras you can watch that talk about that scene and how it was shot, whatever. It's one of those, it's in my memory. It's like, oh, when I think images of Breaking Bad, that is definitely one of them. It's just like a fly on Walt's glasses in season 3. It's always in one of the images I first think of when I think of Breaking Bad. We have a very brief in between scenes of Ted watching Skylar return to the office. It was weird that they included it, but then I realized, of course you're including it, because she just had this whole thing about how she can't be part of this. And then by just seeing her return, it's like, yeah, you're part of it. So that's, otherwise, because it's like it's not even a minute. It's like maybe 40 seconds tops of screen time. Just Ted looking out the window and we see Skylar coming back. I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, no, look, Dan was right. Look, he knew. Anyway.
Yeah.
So back at school, Walt is giving an exam. And and literally right after he yells at everyone in class to put their phones away, we hear another phone buzzing. It's his ceiling phone, his secret ceiling phone. So you have to wait till later before he can access it, and he sees the message Boyos on it. Now, after Walt can't find Gus, but he does find out his name, he's about to depart where he meets another person. A character introduction, like, oh, that might have been glossed over, but we wouldn't do that here. He meets Fring's right-hand man, Victor. Victor, the guy whose name I used to always forget whenever we used to bring him up. So that's when Walt finds out he's got an hour to make an exchange of the product, their 38 pounds of product, for $1.2 million. The problem is Jesse's got the product, and Walt can't get through to Jesse right now. And then in these final minutes of the episode, it's an episode that many seem to rank lower than other episodes, and their reasoning is that they claim it's a slower one. I find that an interesting critique of the episode. I don't necessarily agree with it, especially when I look at the final few minutes, which are anything but slow. It's a crazy race that Walt is having to get to Jesse, to get in his house, to find the product, to bag it, to take off for this rendezvous point. All at the same time, Skylar is trying to call him because, wouldn't you know it, she's going into labor. How do you, even if it's only 5 minutes, you still can't call an episode slow that it ends like that. It just, that makes no sense to you people. You're stupid. And the fact they end the episode kind of like suddenly. It's just like, oh, we just breathlessly end the episode. You know, it's not completed. We don't get a rest. It's like, oh, then, you know, Vince Gilligan's name or whatever it is that appears at the end of the episode. I mean, I think this is really, I don't think it's in my top 25. I'm pretty sure it's not because I would have said it, but it's a damn good episode. I don't know why people calling it slow. They're stupid. Plus, it's the Gus Fring episode. How can anyone knock the episode where you meet Gus Fring? That's huge. That's what she said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people that say something is slow, they're usually, you know, dumb anyway.
Well, that usually means that they're slow. But you know, the other definition. There you go. Yeah, it's the thing we talk about it all the time. It's when people seem to have issues with shows like The Sopranos or Mad Men or The Wire, whatever it is, they say, "Oh, it's too slow."
It's good. You just want to light like $1 worth of sparklers and throw them on the ground in front of them so they're happy.
Yeah, you have the attention span of a 3-month-old kitten or something. Here, Twinkie. Here. So let's move on to the 12th episode of the season. Ooh, Phoenix. This one was directed by Colin Buxey. I want to say Buxley, but I think it's Buxey. And this was the first of 4 Breaking Bad episodes this person would direct. He also rejoined the Breaking Bad universe years later because he actually went on later to direct 3 episodes of Better Call Saul. So, yay. And it was written by John Shaban. He's written many. We've talked about it before. The title of the episode, again, Phoenix. Now, that title might refer to a number of things, such as there's a conversation that happens in this episode between Walt and Mr. Margolis that covers the Mars rover that had landed on, Mars at the time, which was actually referred to as Phoenix. There is the fact that in an earlier episode, at least one, Jane is wearing a shirt that says Phoenix on it, and we are going to learn in the next episode that she was born in Phoenix. Or you could say, in an episode that's about the birth of one daughter and the loss of another, there is that mythic image of a phoenix meaning rebirth. I mean, any or all of those things. Whatever. That's
also, this is where they start selling their meth, not in New York, not in New Mexico, but in the different states around them, including Phoenix, which, at some point in the future, Walt runs into the people from the Arizona, meth syndicate. Yeah.
So, on to the episode. After a quick phone conversation with Marie, Walt drops off his 38 pounds of product in some creepy abandoned motor lodge. And then after, I think he hightails it over to the hospital where Skylar has already given birth to their daughter, Holly. I was actually going to say something about the motor lodge because there's a shot there that I remember, when I first saw this episode, whatever, how long ago it was, 10 plus years ago. I took a photo of it and put it on my page because it was a close-up of a door that said, I saw like the do not disturb thing on it. And as a few people, you, including you, I think know, I had written a script called Do Not Disturb, which I thought was actually going to get made. And here's the weird coincidence and why I'm bringing it up. I can't help myself. Everything has been so bad lately. This is one of the few rays of hope, which I should know better. So this weekend, I watched this episode. I saw this episode on, which day was it? Saturday or Sunday? Saturday. Yes, Saturday night is when I saw this episode. I watched this episode, took the notes on it. And I remember having that thought when I saw the Do Not Disturb thing, right? My friend in Los Angeles, who is also a producer or whatever, called me Sunday. And I thought he was calling me to talk about baseball, and I was already going to hang up on him because he's like one of the most annoying baseball fans I've ever encountered. I hate talking baseball with him. But like, no, I want to tell you a story. He was talking to this other big deal manager, producer guy about a script that he sent over that they were talking about trying to get made. And they thought of me because they were comparing it to Do Not Disturb, except it's much, much worse. And the whole thing was described to me, and I saw that there's very little similarity. I mean, my thing takes place basically in a hotel and blah, blah, blah. This takes place in the forest somewhere, and they're not really, but they both deal with someone being held against their will for a sustained length of time throughout the story. And it's a piece of crap, but he told me everything. I was like, 5 minutes. I could tell you what's wrong with that story. It's horrible. And I told him all that. And he's like, yeah, we don't want to do it. I already rejected it. And then he said, oh, by the way, I know you think there's nothing ever happening with it, but we still send out the script every couple months to people. So there could be something on it. I was like, all right, yeah, sure, whatever. That's like 10 years ago, whatever time it was.
Which version of the script are they sending out? Is it like one of the? It's like, because I remember like I read like the original, the first one that you sent me. I read that, and then you started adding stuff to it, based on like notes from like these random people that never fucking came around to doing anything and stuff.
Oh, it's whatever the last version was. That's one that actually did get better as I honed it more. I mean, the last version, I will put my last version of that script up against most any other movie I've seen over the same time period. So Here's what happened today, and I shouldn't be saying this on the podcast. There's probably nothing going to happen of it. They contacted me about Do Not Disturb today. They said, hey, we want to know, how long would it take you? This also tells you how long ago the script was done. How long would it take you to go through the script and make all the necessary updates so that nothing's, like tech updates. Like there are things I talk about with iPhones and, when I wrote this in 2009 or 10 or whatever year it was, which are a little different now. You have to make certain changes for technology unless you're going to have it take place in 2009 or 10 or whatever the year it was. And I actually have some ideas of how to fix that, whatever. And I was like, I don't know if I get off my ass, I could probably get it done in a week's time. And I probably should not say this on the podcast, but there's someone they want to send it to. I won't say the names. I'll tell you the names after. There's an actor who wants to see the script, but more for directing it rather than being in it. He's not a big deal actor, but you know who the actor is. He's been on at least one show that me and you both watched, and I think we like the actor.
Must be Patton Oswalt, who was on Justified. No,
it would be amazing if it was Patton Oswalt, but no, it's not Patton Oswalt. But again, I'll tell you when we finish recording. It'll be a little cliffhanger for me and you. And it's what makes it more interesting to me. It's not because of that. I mean, that's cool, but it's because he wants to work on something with another friend of his who would maybe be the guy in the movie with another actor that I am actually a really big fan of. And I went, oh, That's one way to get me to fucking... Again, probably nothing will happen with this because I've been led astray before. I'm part of the reason I'm in debt is because of these things. Because I emptied out a 401k thinking my movie's getting made this summer. Nope. But this kind of, it's funny that this weekend I'm watching Breaking Bad. I see the Do Not Disturb thing and I have a memory of that and I got kind of angry. And then I got a call the next day, which was related to that. And I actually mentioned, that's really weird. I literally was thinking about that script last night and I haven't thought about that script like in the last year. It's weird. And then 2 days later, you know, I get the bunch of texts and then a call about, it's like, how long will it take you to do this? Because so-and-so might want to direct it. And he might want his pal so-and-so to be in it. And I was like, okay, I'll crack it open tomorrow then, because I really like that actor. But I'll tell you who after. You're familiar with both people. You're definitely familiar with both people. You're definitely familiar with both.
You just got to tell me if it gets picked up, like, right away. So, like, because the way, like, your year's going, like, I know the second that thing gets, like,
I'll be
picked up, like, be dead, so I'm gonna buy life insurance like on you like right away. That's like a fucking like sure thing, because as soon as that thing's like a done deal, like you're like, you know, like you're done for. I'm sorry, but you're dead.
Oh, so. I've made the comment, especially this how bad my summer has gone and what's happened recently, whatever. I said, oh yeah, so one of my scripts will get made, and you know what's it going to end with? It's going to end with a dedication to me because I'll be dead. That's what. You know, dedicated. I'll be like, wait, isn't that the screenwriter? Oh, wow. I guess it won't be a sequel to this one. Yes, there will be. It's Hollywood. Every other person's a fucking writer out there. Anyway, I didn't mean to go on that long about it, but I what the hell? I thought, what the heck? Anyway, so back to where were we? Oh, Walt going to the hospital where she's already given birth to Holly. And Walt doesn't realize until he's cradling little Holly in his arms that Ted is also still in the room. Because he was the one to drive Skylar to the hospital. Oh, Ted. Now, when Walt goes home to pick up some things for both Skylar and himself, he first opens up a big bag of money and starts to pack it away, bundle by bundle, into the walls of what apparently is the garage. The next morning, after Jane wakes up and realizes she's running late to join her dad for, I guess it's an NA meeting, no longer super high, Jesse finally gets up out of bed, and that's when he discovers the house, which was already a wreck to begin with, but clearly the house has been broken into, and the meth stash is gone. We bounce over to Jane and her dad at the NA meeting, and that's when her dad notices her nervous fidgeting, like with her anniversary token. And he obviously gets even a little bit more suspicious as they're catching up over lunch, especially when he asks her about her dating life and that guy next door. It's one of those things where it's not simply that Jane is not the most convincing liar. She's not bad. You know, she's better than Walt was, you know, at a certain point. But I think he's seen this. It's one of those things because we know that she's in recovery, but there's probably been a lifetime or a litany of lies before. He's going to be able to pick up on things a lot quicker than some will. So he's already kind of like, yeah, there's something wrong here. Something is happening here, I think. Now, why he couldn't just snap and find, he's not cute. That's right. So
I just want to know why, like, Walt was only like gone for like 2 hours, but like his son already had to change a diaper, because that like doesn't seem very likely that, you know, this kid would be born during this time period, and then like they would like, you know, put a diaper on, and then like, you know, his son would already be changing a diaper, because he was only like, you know, 1 hour away from like the drug drop off point.
Oh, so it makes no sense whatsoever. I see, that's something I would call them out for. It's like, what?
Yeah.
I mean,
you know, and yeah,
the baby's only been alive for a couple hours, and okay, let's step away from being all nice about it. First of all, you're not going to let just their son change a diaper. Especially their son who has a certain affliction about him, you know, because he has cerebral palsy. No,
right.
That's not, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. Because they don't know him. You know? Like, no.
They have to do sorts of like fill out checklists and stuff, and like the kid's probably like, you know, blue for like 5 seconds because like, you know, weird shit happens when you're giving birth. You know, I've got a couple kids, so I'm pretty much an expert on this.
There you go, of course.
And everything.
Oh my God, I've got a couple bottles of soda. I'm an expert on soda. So the baby's home, and Walt fields a call from his favorite junkie imbecile, who's panicking that someone broke in and stole their stuff. Walt, he can't even, and he just disconnects the call. It's after that Jesse then notices he has 4 messages on his answering machine. Answering machines, remember those. So we bounce right back to Shea White, and the family is celebrating in the backyard. I love how they're all the way in the background, but what's taking up the foreground is that big shot of the glowing blue pool, which is done, I think it's pretty clear, it's done as a reminder of, let's say it's Walt's side business. It's like, oh yeah, there you go, blue, there you go. And then we see that Hank has brought buckets from Los Pollos Hermanos. There you go. And they're talking about alarm systems and the impending money issues that Walt's surgery is going to bring down on them. Oh, it's so much fun. But later that night, Walt gets up to respond to the baby crying, and that's when he gives Holly a tour of his wall of money. See, that's sweet. I mean, how can you? Did that not, as a dad? Did that not like impact? Like, oh, look how sweet that is! Look at my money.
His lines like, "See what your daddy did for you." It's just like, it's just disgusting. It's like I'm watching like a fucking like a snake like fucking talk. It's just gross. It's just so fucking like this. Ugh.
See, it made me feel all warm and cuddly inside. So we're different people. So the next day, that's when Jesse shows up. Oh, my stomach just made a funny sound. The next day, Jesse shows up at Walt's classroom. Oh, by the way, because this happened now, this is twice this season already. I mean, I don't care. It's 2008, right? Yeah. So it doesn't matter. It's not like it's 1958. What high school allows people just to walk in and wander the halls the way they do in Albuquerque here? Before Saul a couple episodes ago, now Jesse. I mean, look, when I was younger, I used to be able to visit people in my old grade school, but high schools, even, in the 90s or whatever, you always had security guards. You couldn't just walk around. Neither of these people would have had a viable excuse. I could see Saul talking his way in. I cannot see Jesse talking his way in.
I don't know if in a place like Albuquerque that they would have, much for security in a place like that,
Have you seen that place from the outside? That place looks like it has more money than every high school in New York. And this is, keep in mind, I know it didn't happen in New Mexico, but you're not that many states away from any number of school shootings that have happened over the years.
That's one. Yeah. Brooklyn's on like 5.5, 6 hours from Denver area.
So I mean, good Lord, Columbine, people. Anyway, so yeah, I didn't know if it was like a New York thing. I kept thinking about it. No, that should be the case everywhere. But anyway, back to the scene. Jesse gets pissy that Walt didn't tell him that he was the one who took the stash. Walt makes it clear that Jesse nearly blew the fucking deal. Oh, I cursed, sorry. They blew the deal for them, and he had to do it all himself. And as a result of all this, he ended up missing the birth of his own daughter. Now, Jesse does take a moment, but he doesn't say sorry. He just goes right to asking how much money did they make. Now, I know it's because Jesse is right now, he's in the throes of the drug thing, so we're going to forgive him because this is the kind of behavior if Walt was being a prick like this, we would crucify him, but we won't with Jesse because he's on the drugs. But it's still kind of a dickish. Sorry, it is. But that's when Walt says, well, after Saul's cut, it's $480,000. But Walt is not about to hand that kind of money over to someone who's now obviously shooting up heroin. Now, Walt is kind of being deliberately disingenuous here when he asks Jesse to pee in a glass to prove that he's clean. He knows he can't possibly be clean with that short a period of time. Peeing in a glass, it's a totally facetious, silly thing. It's pointless. It's just him being a dick there. Jesse ends up storming out pretty much after Walt makes a reference to his junkie girlfriend, which is now already a sore spot with him, obviously. Probably because guess what, Jesse? You probably now you're part of the reason why she is now going to be considered a junkie girlfriend. Again, still her decision, still her fault, but you played a big part.
Yeah, he was definitely more than just an enabler. He led the whole
right.
And said, "Go ahead, drink this shit."
Right. Although, but he's not. But I'll give him I'll give him credit on this side. Pretty sure he didn't ask her to bring heroin over. I'm pretty sure that she, but he didn't realize, like, no, once you got her started, this is where it's going to go. It's not like it's going to be like pot and shit. All right. So then we have Walt and Marie. This is a little bit important. Walt and Marie, and they're arranging Holly in the crib so that she's on her side and can't choke her, when she spits up, which is foreshadowing once again much. I think, does the other scene earlier or later? I think it's later. I'm going to say it's later. Okay. So, later on. Oh, this is the episode where Junior designs the website to collect donations for his dad. It's the SaveWalterWhite.com website, which I think that might still be active. I mean, it'll take you to like a Breaking Bad site, but I think it still will work. And of course, Walt, being Mr. Too Proud to Beg, doesn't want to take charity, which I would say rightfully annoys Skylar. I think he keeps being this way about this, which is just, it's his stupid pride getting in the way. When we look back, it's like, you know what? You could have just taken the money from Elliot and Gretchen, and then you never would not. Anyway, Walt, jerk. So I'll agree with you with him there. But then you have the Walt and Saul scene, and I gotta love Walt's take on Saul's take on Walt's aggressively anti-charity stance. When he says, no deep-seated issues there, which is like, oh shit, you're right. You're absolutely right, Saul, because we know there are some deep-seated issues here. Gray matter much. But Saul here lays out the way the donation site can be used for Walt to publicly access his money, where hundreds and hundreds of little donations by what he refers to as zombies, which would be accounts that are going to be hacked by some dude in, Belarus. And that's how Walt will start getting his money. Jesse and Jane. Jesse is bitching about Mr. White to Jane, which is also Jesse proving that Walt was right, as well as Gus Fring, by once again, I'm not going to do it anymore. And then he preps another heroin injection himself. And I believe that's where Jane hears the amount of money. I think she first thinks he means $480, which she would be livid about also, but no, it's $480,000. And that's when you can see the wheels start turning in Jane's little malevolent mind there. By the way, in this scene, Jane also props Jesse up so he doesn't choke, the same way that Walt did with Holly. So they hit you with it twice in the episode just to make sure you're not missing that. So that way it's very crystal clear what happens at the end of the episode. And I agree with them doing that. I think it was necessary. If they had just had the one with the baby, it might not have took hold in people's minds as much. But doing it here as well, I think kind of hammers it home pretty well. Mm-hmm. Now, she does not meet her dad for another NA meeting, because she gets woken up again by his call, and she spins the same overslept excuse to him, except this time, Daddy Q is outside the house as she comes rushing out of Jesse's apartment. Now, I gotta say, and then when John Delancey storms through that house, seeing like the druggy debris everywhere, and the way it all plays out between him and his daughter and Jesse, it's kind of, for me, it was like one of the more agonizing scenes I've had to sit through in Breaking Bad, at least up to this point, It's just so, oof. And this is one of several scenes from this point on that really reminded me that, I really do love him as Q on Star Trek. It's a great character, great part, whatever. But it's a nice reminder, like, oh, this is an actor capable of a lot of other things as well.
Oh, yeah, he's so good in this. It's just, just really good.
I mean, it's a nice thing where a character that if you add it all up, you only see him for like a few scenes total. And he does so much with those scenes, and we're informed so much by them. I feel like I know his entire life. And her life by extension. So it's a really great job.
He's just such a better character, such a better performance than like Jesse's parents, for example. I mean, like, it just, you can just tell, like, the look, his facial expressions, like, you just know exactly what he's been through, what he's noticing, like what he's feeling. It's just so good. it's just rock solid. It's so effective.
Right. I don't know if I don't want to say that he's a better actor necessarily, but there may be a better person. Because he is. I mean, because I get the impression, especially if she was doing heroin.
Yeah.
Jane has gone through a lot worse stuff drug wise than Jesse had. Jesse was not if Jesse wasn't on heroin, Jesse was a pot guy and maybe, smoking his crack or meth or whatever the heck it was, which is not great, but it's not heroin. To me, heroin is like, oof, that's the big one. To me, and I put that over even coke. Heroin's the one that'll kill you. Not that the others won't, but pot's not gonna. Anyway, got to show. So anyway, the way she is direct. About Jane. So it's what's interesting is you have this agonizing scene between her and her dad, and it's like, ugh. And then the way she turns on a dime right after.
She's so manipulative, and I've seen this kind of behavior, in reality enough times where I'm just like, nope, I don't like it. Nope.
Yeah, just her mind is already on that pile of money that's owed to Jesse, and it's made even more evident by that phone call, which shifts pretty quickly from a demand for Jesse's money, from rightly owed money from Walt, to just straight up blackmail. And you can see that Jesse himself is pretty uncomfortable with the way that goes down. He even says, like, he's my partner, and she's like, I'm your partner. And I'm like, oh boy, this is not bode well. This is not boding well. And when we go back to the White House, we see the White House. I love saying that. I love doing it that way. We see that Walt is listening to Skylar and Holly on the baby monitor while he's contemplating just what the hell he's going to do. But he takes the opportunity. He's supposed to be going out for diapers. That's when he's going to go bring the money over. Jane, she's a little bit aggressive here. Not you, Jesse. How do I, and he even says, how do I know she'll keep quiet? And she's like, I guess you don't. And, Jesse's trying like, you'll never see or hear from us again. But she's more about, he tries to get through to Jesse, you're not seeing things clearly, but Jane just basically slams the door in his face. So she's definitely being the aggressor in this scene.
And the fact she's like literally like waiting at the door for him to show up for hours and hours, and just runs for the door when he gets there. It's just like, ugh, no, not cool.
Yeah, no. So after he leaves, that's when they see the money. They open it up and they start imagining the possibilities. And I love this. Again, it's almost a childlike thing. There's so many things like, you can't just, hey kids, by the way, you can't bring a giant bag of money on a plane anywhere. You can't do that, right? You're gonna have to come up with a different way to have that sent, electronically or something. You can't do that. I don't care if you go to, New Zealand or New Brunswick. You can't do that. But to her credit, give her credit for something. Jane does insist that they get clean first, and Jesse agrees, and that seems really plausible for like about, I don't know, a good 15, 20 seconds. So they're standing in the doorway of his room, and you see the candle, it's lit, and the works on the nightstand, and yeah, it's a bad thing. Drugs are bad. So it's funny. Was it not in the previous episode where Jesse was doing, this is your brain on drugs, and then you see how these scenes unfold later on. It's like, yeah, maybe you really should have paid more attention to that commercial back in the late 80s there, Jesse. Walt stops at a bar for I just had to write this down. A Fat Tire draft beer. I just love the sound of that. He's on the phone with Skylar. He lies, of course, because that's what Walt does, about his diaper search. But he gets a well played from Mr. Donald Margolis, who's seated right near him. And of course, these two have a really nice scene together. As you and I both know, John Delancey does have a reputation of having great scenes with excellent bald actors. See, I worked that in there. See, I thought you liked that. And it's at this point, and one of the things they're first talking about is that they found water on Mars, hence the Phoenix rover, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I also like the fact that, you're talking to a character from an actor a lot of people recognize from Star Trek, and your first topic is Mars. I kind of got a kick out of that too. But their conversation really tends to be more about kids, about family, about how you can't give up on them and stuff. Ooh, this conversation it's interesting trying to pick what domino we can blame for what leads to what eventually happens. I mean, and you can go here. It's like, yeah, but this is the conversation with her dad that inspires Walt to go back to the house, to try to reason with him once more. And again, there's no answer at the front door. And that's when Walt goes to the back and he's able to peek through the blinds, kind of creepy. And he sees they're asleep in bed, which I was like, that was fast. But he lets himself in through that hole in the door that he gave like that Jack Torrance treatment to the other day. And the two of them, Jesse and Jane, they're lying on their side next to each other. But it's as Walt is trying to shake Jesse, trying to wake him up, the jostling kind of shakes her loose and she rolls over onto her back. Oh, apparently there was, the original script had something that was more deliberate on Walt's part, so he would be more directly responsible. I mean, like really directly responsible for it. And I think, as the story goes, Bryan Cranston had a totally different idea in which his character would have almost no culpability in her ending up on her back and choking. And they pretty much came up with a compromise, and which is the resulting scene, which I think is probably the best way. Compared to the other options, I think they came up with the best option. So, well done.
Yeah.
But he hasn't noticed that she's rolled over onto her back, as why would he? He's more looking at the heroin needle and he tosses it away. Meth was bad enough, but now he knows how much more likely heroin can be as a death sentence. And speaking of death sentence, that's when Jane starts coughing up vomit in her sleep. And Walt, he starts to help, and he stops. He thinks. He restrains. He's paralyzed. And during all this is when her choking stops. And as her eyes open up just slightly, it kind of confirms Jane has just died. And Walt is just standing over her. He's teary-eyed. He's sickened, but he's resolute as well. It is interesting to note that this scene had a massive impact on Cranston, both as an actor, as a person. He wrote all about it in an autobiography he did a few years back, and how it affected him. Anna Gunn has talked about how he was for this scene, that Cranston apparently cried for 10 straight minutes after they had finished filming. I mean, it's powerful. It also happens to be the episode that Cranston actually submitted to the Emmys for his leading actor nomination. And guess what? He won. But it's just, I think this is the episode. This is the thing that if, back in the day of when people had, water cooler moments, although nowadays it's, 5 minutes later on Twitter, I guess, or something people were talking about the next day after they saw it. Even though the show wasn't as widely watched yet, it didn't become a widely watched show until probably its final season, thanks to things like Netflix and everything else. But this is the thing, I think this becomes the big source of debate and wow about the show, I think, is this scene,
Yes.
And I guess I think I have multiple friends who watched the show, and except for just her. They all stuck with the show and really loved the show all the way to the end. But I think I mentioned this in maybe the first podcast. The thing with Walter White's character is, depending who you are and your personality and how you feel about things, many people, there's different points along the journey with Walter White that people got off that train, where he was the guy you were rooting for up until this point. There's like, yeah, he couldn't be my guy anymore. I couldn't root for him anymore. I started to hate him now, or I switched over to Jesse or to Hank or whatever it was. I think this is the big moment that really lost a lot of people. I don't agree with them, but I understand it,
Mm. Oh, I like him. I like him more now than I usually do.
That's right. I was going to say, I was waiting until I wanted to see if you would say it. I was like, well, based on what you were saying before, I think this is this might have been the scene that won him over for you.
Yeah, it didn't take me long to thoroughly dislike Junkie Jane. So
yeah, I love the actress, but the character. Oof. Again, I shouldn't say it that way. Great character, but a character you wanted to hate, but she's a great character. And speaking of winning, this episode came in number 12 on my top 25 Breaking Bad episodes. La, la, la. So, we've been talking for a while. Let's get to the final episode then. Final episode of season 2 is ABQ. Once again, directed by Adam Bernstein. And hey, look, Vince Gilligan handled this one all by himself. The writing chores, I mean. And ABQ completes the phrase made up by the several season 2 titles, 737 down over ABQ. ABQ being the airport code for Albuquerque International Airport. And just the way some people sometimes will abbreviate Albuquerque. But we start the episode, and we're back to the black and white cold opens, and we know, you knew when you were watching this the first time, way back when, you knew that we were going to be getting a payoff to these black and white cold opens. And the first couple minutes, it's basically cutting together all the previous, we'll call them flash forwards, all into one piece. But as we move past what we've seen already, we move past the beginning stages of the Pink Bear Odyssey and those 2 body bags and so on and so forth, we see more techs picking up pieces of what they tag as evidence, shoes, burned books, people with metal detectors searching for things. Hey, there's Jack Shepard. No, anyway. And during all this, and what's the one thing that's different about even what we had seen before, in the background, there's a constant whine of sirens. Be they police, fire, ambulance, we are hearing sirens through all this. Where we hadn't, I don't think we had quite heard that before. I think it was more discordant tones and music and the different Dave Porter, sounds that were used as opposed to that. And here now we're seeing that there are other body bags being carted away. And we do pick up again with that raggedy pink bear. Now he's in an evidence, it's in an evidence container that's getting, loaded up onto a van. And as we pull back just a little bit, that's when the picture becomes clear. Because we see the van has the letters NTSB, which is the National Transportation Safety Board. And that's when the black and white becomes color and the camera pulls way back and we see that there is a few plumes of smoke in the distance and on the horizon. And there are several helicopters hovering all about. And at that point, you can pretty much, if you put 2 and 2 together, you get 4. And 4 equals there was some sort of airplane disaster. And that's what's happened in the neighborhood. We just don't know the extent of it at this point in the episode. Ow, hurt myself. Now, we cut from that to, it hurts my heart when I watch it. So I will use the phrase heartbreak then. The heartbreak of seeing Jesse trying to revive Jane when we know she's been dead for hours and hours at this point. Now, what I didn't remember, I alluded to this in the very beginning of the podcast like 18 days ago, that clearly he calls Walt, who's, Walt's in his living room with, baby Holly in his arm again. I actually forgot that Jesse called Walt first. I thought for somehow I forgot that. I thought he called Saul himself. I should have remembered, otherwise it was bad on me for forgetting that. Now it's interesting how to consider Walt's behavior here. And it kind of goes to some stuff we've talked about already. Because on one hand, his behavior and the way he talks to Jesse, it's exemplary. It's like, oh, this is the person you should be. And then you think, yeah, you're also the person who, inadvertently caused, and then you allowed Jane to die, which is why he's in the state he's in. It makes it it certainly makes it a lot more interesting to watch because he's doing that while he knows he's responsible to whatever extent. Some would say, well, completely. But it doesn't matter because Walt knows who to call. This is something I think we were looking forward to. And then we cut back and we see a 1988 Chrysler Fifth Avenue pulls up in front of Jesse's house. And as I look back, I'm a little surprised it wasn't a Crown Vic, but anyway, it's another car that will become forever associated with its owner in the Breaking Bad universe, because this is where we are introduced to a Mr. Mike Ehrmantraut. And I love knowing that the first words that Mike ever says on screen are Saul Goodman sent me. It's very fun to know that. Now, I know you and I know many, many people already know the story behind the creation of the Mike character and the casting of Jonathan Banks. how this is pretty much almost practically done on the fly. Because originally it was supposed to be Saul Goodman who shows up, but Odenkirk was unable to be filming that week because he was actually in the midst of playing Jason Segel's boss on How I Met Your Mother. So they had to create this totally new character, like a character who was like a cleaner. It was supposed to be a little reminiscent of maybe Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction, but without the tuxedo. And it's funny when you know all that because we all know how really big a deal Mike turned out to be on this show and its subsequent show. But it's one of those, it's just, I love the fact it's one of those things, it's actually true, but and Banks has talked about it himself and Odenkirk has certainly talked about it. Like, if it hadn't been for the fact that Odenkirk couldn't film, Mike and Jonathan Banks never would have been on the show. I think that's a great story. I just love that. So Mike goes into, again, cleaner mode with Jesse, whatever. He goes through the house, picking up this, that, and the other thing, and making sure, all the drug paraphernalia, whatever, gets the money together. And then he stops to talk to Jesse, in the living room. And because Jesse's so out of it, he has to slap him around a couple times to get him to come out of it. Turns out when Jonathan Banks is slapping Aaron Paul, Banks did not hold back. He actually really fucking belted him a couple times. Paul has talked about this. He's like, no, that's not a stage slap. He really fucking hurt me. But speaking of Aaron Paul and the scene, good Lord, how convincing is he here? This is a season, and one of the great things about season 2, it's already had a couple real standout episodes for Aaron Paul, with Down and Peekaboo, I would say. But this scene, and specifically when he keeps having to repeat the phrase, I woke up, I found her, that's all I know. Ooh, I mean, it might actually end up being sadder than the thing I mentioned, with him curling up, in the fetal position in the trailer earlier in the season being the saddest thing for Jesse. It's like, ooh, I think this might have topped it. And Aaron Paul is just so good here. It's, ooh. I was up when I watched him. I was like, and I looked up like, wait, he didn't win the Emmy there. He won the Emmy in other seasons, but Paul didn't win it for this scene alone. He should have won the goddamn Emmy.
Do you remember who won this season? I think they're playing.
I don't know. I forgot. I can't believe I forgot to check that out because I was wondering. I mean, it could be somebody good because there was a lot of good shows on at this time. So it could have been a Mad Men person, it could have been a Lost person, could have been something totally different. I should look that up. Maybe for
this is because I think this is kind of before everybody started winning for Justified, but they were good, so it was good. That's about it. But I think this predates that. But maybe Damages. I remember somebody won for Damages. I was kind of running up a onesies, and it was Damages was good too at the time. So
it might have been. Oh, it's funny you should mention Damages because you'll find that after the podcast. Anyway, hint. I don't even have IMDb up anymore. Okay, I don't want to waste time on it. We'll figure it out. I don't care. Before I move on to the next scene, I just want to mention one other thing about it, then I'll move on. By the way, I'm sure if you're paying attention, you'll notice this. Mike never gives his name. So the only reason we know he's Mike is because we know he's Mike, but on the show, he never says what his name is. Okay. At least in this scene. So back at the House of White, the donations are starting to roll in on the Save Walter White website. Each donation, by the way, pops up with a very familiar sounding ding. I don't have it next to me, so I can't do it on the podcast like I did it a million times in the last podcast. Yes, just in case you were wondering, that is the exact same bell sound as Hector Salamanca's bell. They did use the same sound for the website, so ha ha. And then when Jane's dad arrives to take her to rehab, that is brutal.
Mm-hmm.
When he's watching from the car, when he goes inside, when they tell him the guy, the MT guys tell him you don't want to be here for the. Ooh, it's the hole in your stomach is just, it's so bad. Yeah. And again, it's him because, our feelings about Jane, could be like, I don't know if some of us would say she deserves it, but it's, we're not going to be we'll be upset by the way others react to her loss and how it affects them than the loss of that character. We're upset by the way Jesse is. And we're really upset by the way her dad is, but we're not necessarily as upset that she's gone, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And then for season 2 of Breaking Bad, Aaron Paul lost to Michael Emerson for Lost. So I guess we can.
It was a loss. You know what? I can't argue with that one because who's my favorite actor on Lost? Michael Emerson. Yeah, there you go. And by the way, everyone out there, if you have Paramount Plus, please watch Evil. I talked about it before. Oh, this last episode. He's so good. Anyway, forget Benjamin Lanacim on Evil. It's just, he's funnier. Anyway, so Walt is apparently hiding his cell phone in a toilet tank now and leaves Jesse a message. And all I could think was, really? The toilet tank? Because we're assuming she's never gonna, whatever. Okay, fine. He picks I'm sorry, Walt picks some really stupid hiding places for things. I just, the ceiling tile in the classroom is dumb. Like, why wouldn't you just, never mind. So it is an amusing, speaking of the donations from before, there's a very cute little visual amusing wink here, because we actually switch over to Hank and the troops over at the DEA. When he holds up that donation jar with Walt's photograph on it, and he's holding it in such an angle where it's Walt's face is right in front and under the wanted poster. And I was like, oh, look, that's very cute. If they only knew, look what they're doing there. So here Hank is talking about Combo's death. And as we knew from the expression on his face back in Better Call Saul, and I just didn't choose to mention it on the podcast at that point, because I'm talking about it here, Hank clearly believes that APD got it wrong with the schmuck that they arrested. He thinks that Heisenberg is absolutely still out there, except now he's gone regional, as you had mentioned before. That special brand of meth of his, which they apparently are now referring to as Blue Sky, because I guess they're big ELO fans or something out there in New Mexico. It's appearing in all the states around New Mexico, but not in New Mexico. So I was like, all right, you guys are putting it together here. It's pretty smart. It's dumb. So we go back to Walt. His wife, his son, they're just so transfixed by the donations that are rolling in. Walt just finds a moment to call Saul, because right now it's all about finding Jesse. And that's where the next thing you know, Walt is actually in Mike's passenger seat outside a very sketchy looking spot where Jesse has holed up apparently to get high and just to forget about her and life and everything. Oh, and by the way, remember how I just mentioned, I went on a few moments ago about, you got to create the Mike character because Bob Odenkirk was busy filming another TV show. It's very clear he was unavailable for the entire episode because we never hear him in any of these phone conversations with Walt. And in fact, I think just to make things, so things wouldn't, what's the word I'm looking for? There's something to do in this episode. All the phone conversations are handled that way. Whereas normally, if there's a phone conversation between, say, Walt and Jesse, you would hear both sides of it. They might either cut back and forth between them, or you at least would hear the voice on the other side. But they didn't do that earlier when Jesse clearly called Walt, but we never hear Jesse. We just hear Walt's reaction to it. And I think they wanted to be consistent throughout the episode, because if you're not, then it kind of sticks out. Then you become more aware of the fact that Odenkirk is not there. I think it's a trick. I realized it, halfway through. Oh, I see what they're doing. That's cute. That's smart. It's subtle. I get it. So I just thought I'd mention that. But Mike is there. So it's important. It's the first meeting between Mike and Walt. And this is one of the, Mike doesn't hate Walt yet, but, you'll give him time. But no, Walt is the one who chooses to go into this dark, warped drug den, and he finds Jesse. And what I said before about Aaron Paul's performance, I think goes triple here. And to what you were saying about, maybe giving Walt credit at times where he actually is a decent human being. I think the scene with Jesse here would be one of those scenes. And yes, he is somewhat tortured by the fact that he is to blame for this because he let her die, whatever. But still, but you can, at least there is so much remorse and regret with his character. And he definitely, and it's now is one of the only times, at least at this point in the series, where you believe he genuinely cares about Jesse, you know?
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally.
I mean, he did up to a certain point when, when Jesse showed up and in the trailer in the first half of the season and whatever. We talked about that in the previous podcast. But here it's much more, it's just bigger. And I'm probably I'm even more of a softie now than probably when I first watched this 10, 12 years ago. I will admit I got a little verklempt, whatever. So, and speaking of getting verklempt, oh Lord, Mr. Margolis, Don, he returns to his daughter's apartment, I guess, in preparations for a funeral. And again, it's great. It's great work by Delancey here. And then there's a kind of a startling cut at the end of the scene where you have Jane's prospective funeral dress kind of laid out on the bed, arms out, whatever. And they cut right to Holly on the bed and, at the White household and in the similar position. And just, it's almost, it's startling, the cut. And to me, it reminds me of a theory I had, a few seasons from now where I was speculating, every time like, oh, they're going to kill Holly. The show's going to break one of the biggest rules of all. They're killing a baby. They're killing Holly. And I think I might have said once that was like the first time, like they prophesized that back at the end of season 2. They're killing Holly. They keep dressing her up as the pink teddy bear. They're killing Holly. They never kill Holly. But it's the one theory I was so adamant about it. And I was watching Ozymandias. I was so sure, oh, they're going to begin with killing Hank and end with killing Holly. And then they don't kill her. God damn it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's too bad that maybe they could kill her in the future scenes in Better Call Saul.
Oh, that's right. I wonder if Phil never thought about that. That should be the crossover character that no one would know who it is. And then they should. Oh, she wouldn't be old enough. I mean, she'd be too old. But I was like, and just to fuck with everyone's head, hire like Kieran Shipka to play Holly. She plays all the daughters on AMC shows. Anyway, yeah, so back at the Walt house, and I don't know, Walt, this is one of the things where he becomes a little too not comic booky, just cartoony is the word I'm looking for. Walt, you'd think you could restrain your annoyance just a little bit with the whole website thing, because full well, most of those donations that are coming in, it's your money. Let it go. So your whole pride charity, shut up. No. Because at this point, at least, it's your money. Damn well it's not charity. It's you. It's you and your drug money. Shut the fuck up. Sure.
It's more like you get credit for it anyway. I mean, it's just like, so I don't know what the problem is, but it's just
it's funny how you have a link from Breaking Bad to Seinfeld because Bryan Cranston played a character on several episodes of Seinfeld, but then, the dentist character, whatever. But it's funny because that is so George Costanza. He's just all the time. He's just mad because he's not getting the credit for it. Not a big salad. So Hank is back at the office, and that's when his boss, introduces him to three corporate sponsors and community leaders are supporting this upcoming fun run event. And one of those men just happens to be Gus Fring. Now, question is, based on what we already know about Gus Fring here, we already know that he's a very careful and cautious man. And the fact is, from what we have already just been told about him, never mind how we know everything about this character from this point on, just what we know at this point in time, if we've seen this for the very first time, I think we would all agree he would have undeniably vetted Walter White before he would have even been willing to meet him in person in that previous episode that we talked about.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that because he already knows that Walter White's brother-in-law is a DEA agent. There's no way he doesn't know. He knows that. Number two, he already knows Walter White has lung cancer. He knows. There's no way he doesn't. Because, look, if Saul could have Mike find Walt in just a couple hours in that other episode, and we know Mike really works for Gus, I'm pretty sure Mike found out all these other things about Walt also and already gave that report to Gus. So, and again, this doesn't mean I'm not knocking the scene at all. What's interesting here is that nothing that Hank does or says here should in any way be a revelation to Gus. I think we're seeing this because it's purely about seeing Gus being told it. It's just telling the viewer, oh, you might not have thought about this. This is our way of telling you Gus knows. Walt knows that his name is Gustavo or Gus, and he's at the street, but Gus knows a lot more about Walt than vice versa.
Yeah. Of course, I kind of see it as like, maybe Gus is trying to evaluate if Walt is if Hank's involved in this at all, or if it's some big, like if it's a big trap or whatever like that,
Oh, absolutely. I think about this visit and subsequent ones, Gus is going there for, just little drips of information just about the overall case and to see where they are and if Hank couldn't in any way be involved or what have you. Yeah, I agree.
And that's a situation where, because of the way, Gus has himself positioned in the community, this is he can gauge, what's going on here from a different position because, Hank will be more, disarmed around him than it's not like Victor or Tyrese or fucking Mike are going to get this kind of information, totally off. So
Gus Fring is the public face of his own restaurant thing, so he has it's something when they talk about things that he and Walter White have in common. Him actually even more so. They're both hiding in plain sight. They're right there in front of you, and you just don't realize it. So it does actually apply to both of them. So that is something that they have in common, beyond all the other little weird fastidious things they have in common. So speaking of Walt, Walt now has apparently brought Jesse to some very, I would say, new agey rehab facility called Serenity. But it has nothing to do with Firefly, unfortunately. But Jesse he's basically in the deep, depressing ruminations here. Pretty much saying that he deserves this. And he's not talking about the pretty green robes they give him. See, I'm all about the robes, But, again, Walt makes it clear this is where you are to, they'll help you deal with the pain, also help clean you up. And once you're out of here, Saul has your money. So it's kind of, it's weird. Walt and Jesse have that teacher-student relationship. And sometimes it's a very toxic relationship between them. But this is one of the few times where it's, there's a little bit of father-son thing going on here. A little bit. Maybe more than what Walt has in his own house, quite frankly, at times.
Oh, definitely.
But speaking of his son, Flynn. Walt comes home to find a TV crew is there. That newspaper story that was going to happen with Flynn? Well, thanks to Marie, because of course it's Marie. It's now going to be a piece on the TV news. And my first thought is isn't Gus Fring going to see this? Is this really what you want to be? You want to be on the TV news? Anyway, the reporter is eliciting comments from Flynn about his dad, about how he's good and decent and always does the right thing. And while he's doing it, the camera, for us at least, our camera, is staying trained on Walt. And the expression on his face, because his thoughts are probably mirroring our own right now, is a man who's good and decent and always does the right thing. Would such a person let a woman die the way Walt just did the other day? Not to mention all the other things that he has done, killing this one, lying about this, and this, and this, and this, and being part of a drug trade. There's so much. And we're barely started on the Walter White Heisenberg journey at this point too. It's a masterclass in, what's the phrase? I know Brian uses it all the time, like face acting. It's great face acting, with Cranston here. It's so good. And it's interesting because when you watch him in that scene, I had forgotten, I will confess, I've forgotten that Walt, at least in this episode, Walt is genuinely tortured by the guilt of what he did. And that kind of dissipates when we pick up with season 3 until the Fly episode. But I always thought of it as just something that we see peek out in the Fly episode. I just forgot. Oh no, he's not aloof and cold about it the next day. He's feeling it. He's feeling bad about what he did. So again, I'm not letting him off the hook for it. I'm not sure I'm against him doing it either, because I understand it. But it's just interesting to know, like, okay, there's a bit more going on here than I kind of had recollected.
Yes.
So then Walt is about to have the surgery. The drugs are kicking in. He's out. He's spacey, goosey, loosey, whatever, out of it. And before Flynn and Marie, Skylar, leave the room, she takes his glasses and she asks where his cell phone is. And he groggily says, "Which one?" Uh-oh. Just when you thought you were out with that goddamn cell phone thing, Walt, you druggily fucked it all up. So there's surgery, weeks pass, and we next see Walt and Skylar meeting with the two doctors again. Now he's wearing a really bright pink sweater, which, looks oddly like a certain little teddy bear. Anyway, just saying. And that weird, sad, bizarre mustache of his is now part of a much better looking goatee. So he definitely upped his grade on that there. At the same time we're seeing this, we see that Don Margolis has returned back to work. And in fact, he runs into the dad from Small Wonder. I always have to mention that, in the break room. I just love the fact they cast a guy that people only know as being the dad from one of the worst sitcoms in recorded history. So it's amazing. And this is kind of around the time when we discover that Don is an air traffic controller. And which I would guess is where it starts to dawn on all the viewers who are watching this for the first time, how those cold opens are really connecting to the overall story. But before that collision happens, Gilligan decides we need to blow the White household apart first, which is what proceeds to happen when Skylar calls out Walt for all the lies. Everything from the second cell phone to the Schwartz money to even going to see his mom. Bing, bang, boom. He's got 2 days to leave the house. Now, again, is this something that the pro-Walter people suddenly became anti-Skylar about? Or could you be rational and think, she's being nice giving him 2 days? The fact that she put all this together? Look at it's a good thing the divorce lawyer wasn't on the phone already. So I am oddly kind of pro-Skylar with all this in this scene here. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So we switch back to Don. He's directing the air traffic, and you'll notice at one point, because one of the planes he refers to with the designation Juliet Mike, he actually says Jane Mike, which is a bad sign. Because what? Oh.
Yep.
And then, and you notice that the soundtrack, there's that Dave Porter again, it's starting to get just a little bit more and more discordant, and we see those two blips on the screen are nearing each other. And then, the way I'll just end this, you see Walt by the pool, the explosion, the bear, the end. And that's pretty much how we end season 2. Now, I know I went on a little stream there, so was there anything that kind of caught your eye or fancy about this, or anything else that we wanted to mention before we finish up here?
I'm not sure if I said it on the pod before, but for this explosion, they use the same visual effects team that does all the stuff for Battlestar Galactica, probably. So if you watch that, definitely has a similar appearance to like the various big ship explosions on that show. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yes. I know we've talked about it. I don't think we ever talked about it on the podcast because we've probably never talked about this episode on the podcast. But that's absolutely, it's one of those things I love about Breaking Bad, that there's a couple key things over the course of the show where they brought in people from another show, to help end the season. They brought the Battlestar Galactica people for this visual effect, whatever, and it looks like that. And they brought in, what's his name? Greg, I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on his name, and I've seen his name a billion times. The main guy who does the special effects for The Walking Dead. Greg Nicotero? Is it Nicotero? Well, they brought him in at the end of season 4 for What Happens to Gus Fring. That's a great Nicotero effect. So I just love, like, these people are famous for these other shows, come in to help Breaking Bad with something significant on their final episode. So, right. How else would you get a connection between BSG and, although, is there any actors? I'll figure that out later.
The New Mexico and the California crowd, or the Canada crowd. They're probably pretty far away, but I'm sure I could think of something if I gave it some time.
Probably. All right. So I like I said, I just, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, or just to say it in one sentence instead of 18 paragraphs, I call season 2 basically the most underrated great season of Breaking Bad. It's one of those when you realize, wow, that's a great season, and no one ever talks about that being the great season. We skip right to 3, 4, and 5, but nothing wrong with that. It's nice to know, wow, season 2, that was damn good. So, as far as future podcasting and Breaking Bad specifically, we will be back to discuss the first half of Breaking Bad season 3. Now, let me do the math here. We're recording this, by the way, peek behind the curtain. We're actually recording this one crazy early, but we're releasing it. You guys are getting this on the 17th. Now, we have these set for every 3 weeks. So 7 to the 3rd, carry the 2, X is greater than Y. We'll be back on October 8th. Oh my God. For the next Breaking Bad rewatch podcast. So between now, when you guys are listening to this, and October 8th, I would advise you to watch the first 7 episodes of Breaking Bad season 3. Now, as far as there being any other podcasts between now and then, there might be one, there might be 2. I will say, and I'll try to keep myself brief for a change, there was something that was being planned between myself and a host of another podcast that we were going to collaborate on something. That has actually fallen through. That's not going to be able to happen now. Scheduling conflicts with other podcasts and whatnot. So I'm kind of happy I never actually told you guys what it was about, because now it's not going to happen. Even though I do have an idea for a substitution in mind, I don't know if that's logistically possible either. So I might just have to let it go. I'll let you know one way or the other. You'll know one way or the other later this month. But I don't think it's going to happen. I'll just say it would be covering a series that certainly does not fall under the usual genres we cover on this podcast, and I will leave it at that. Beyond that, I did have an idea to cover a few shows that came out in the last week or so. I don't think that's going to happen either. I think there's another conflict going on. The only thing I can tell you for sure is I know Doom Patrol is returning, I think on September 23rd. I don't know if they're only going to do 1 episode at a time, or they're going to dump a few first and then a couple. That will be covered. That will definitely be covered on the podcast. Hopefully it's me and Brian will be able to handle that. And my idea is that we might add at least 1 segment to those podcasts where I can then discuss a little bit about the upcoming series on FX on Hulu, for Why the Last Man, because I think that's like the best non-superhero comic book that I've read in the last 20 odd years. And so I'm excited to watch that, and hopefully if it's half as good as the comic, it should be a great series. So, fingers crossed. And I'm going to say that's it. Like I said, there was something else I was thinking of. I actually reached out to someone today about it. It doesn't seem likely, so there's only one more person I might ask. And if they can't do it, I'm going to be like, you know what? Why am I creating extra work? that would be about two shows that do not fall under the drama category either. The one thing they have in common is they both have very long titles. So you guys can figure that one out. And if we've already done it, then you already know what it is because it already came out. It probably is not going to happen. And, yeah, that's it. So I'm going to stop there because I do tend to drag out the ends of these podcasts. So where else am I supposed to be talking? Oh, I'm supposed to be doing the wrap up here, ain't I? Let me skip all this. Well, I ignored all the notes I had. I did all the weird. Anyway, if you enjoyed this podcast, I hope you did. Then you'll enjoy hanging out on our Facebook page as well. It's the Serious TV Drama podcast page. Wow. You can like the page and join the conversation about shows past and present, like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, you name it. You can find this podcast. You can find it almost everywhere podcasts are available. It's on your Spotify, your Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, up your mother's. Anyway, you can please follow us on Instagram. I know most of you haven't. I know you haven't. For shame. Follow us there. Our alias there is Serious TV Drama, as one word. And I would like you to follow us on Twitter too. It's actually not as important to me as the other one. Don't ask why. Because I'm putting more time into the Instagram account. But on Twitter, you can follow us at STVD Podcast. STVD, of course, as in Serious TV Drama. So, Daniel, thank you. I'll say thank you for being the commas to all my run-on sentences tonight.
Yeah. You're welcome. And the asterisks every now and then.
Yeah. You're the ellipse in my sentence. Oh, Lordy. All right. I'll end it there by saying so. Thank you. And for everybody else, for the Breaking Bad fans out there, I don't know. See you same bad time, same bad channel.